Morning, glory, America. Bonjour, hi, Canada. I'm so glad you're listening. I'm Hugh Hewitt. Now, I almost hesitate to tell you that I'm in California since about 3/4 of you, of my 400 affiliates, are basically buried. This major winter storm named Uri, why I do not know, has smashed records in Texas and Oklahoma. It got started in the Pacific Northwest. It made its way down south. Now it's bouncing back up in Maine, where it's got ice storms all along the place. It has set records of the sort you really don't want to set on the long weekend. And there is, it continues to smash through. All of my beloved Ohio is under a winter storm warning at this hour. And as we look at the recap, it started in the Pacific Northwest with heavy snow and damaging ice Friday into Saturday, and Seattle had a 2-day snowfall of 11 inches, which of course means Amazon didn't shut down because it's Amazon. Heavy snow and wind gusts over 60 miles an hour were reported in Albuquerque, New Mexico. 6 inches of snowfall in Oklahoma City, where oil drilling stopped, of course. In Texas, Dallas-Fort Worth just stopped. They had 4 inches of snowfall. In Ohio, we call that May. But in Texas, Dallas-Fort Worth, they shut down. Parts of the Houston metro area had 5 inches of snow, which we call April in Ohio, but they shut down too. And they've got pictures of people on skis in Houston. And San Antonio, I gather you avoided it. You're the only place in Texas. So people are retreating to San Antonio and long columns of refugees from the winter, as the funniest tweet of the day came from the Babylon Bee. Millions who left California for the Texas finally feel at home as they lose power. And so I understand the weather story. There's not much I can cover for you. All of our stations have local weather inserts. So let me go to the news of the day. Hope you had a great long weekend. Hope you enjoyed our President's Day show yesterday. As I predicted, in 2020, President Trump was acquitted over the weekend. So let's go to the other news. Benjamin Netanyahu. If 570,000 more people over the age of 50 get vaccinated, Israel will be done with COVID. They've opened the stores, gyms, culture is moving back towards normalcy in Israel because the vaccine works. And they've got about 500,000 people, 570,000 over 50 need to get vaccinated, and they will be done. In Britain, their fast-running coronavirus campaign has hit its early target, offering a first dose to 15 million elderly people and healthcare workers. The death rate is plummeting. From the Financial Times, the rollout of the vaccine in the European Union is an absolute flabbergasting mess. It makes the American California rollout appear to be Amazon. It really is. It's just an utter and total mess. But what this is teaching us is small, compact states that are highly homogeneous, and Israel is. It does have an Arab minority. It does have a ultra-Orthodox minority, which are difficult to work with. But it's a highly homogeneous and patriotic group, highly informed citizenry, and it works there. Other places, not so much. By the way, in Israel, Netanyahu says, whoever endangers us on Iran nukes, for example, I oppose that. Joe Biden has still not called Benjamin Netanyahu, as President Biden is attempting to send a message, I guess, that we don't like Israel. I don't know what that is. It's bad. They are our most reliable ally in the world. And I assume that, like the arms review of the United Arab Emirates and like the arms halt to Saudi Arabia, the cold shoulder to Israel is President Biden's way of saying, we're not the people that liked you. You had your way with Team Trump, and you're not going to get anything from us. And Netanyahu said, I'm not worried. I got a lot of friends in Congress in both parties. He's, by the way, beginning to be buoyed in the polls by the fact that he has rolled out. He's gotten Pfizer and Moderna to both agree to put plants in Israel. I know that Netanyahu is extremely unpopular in some areas of of the country as they approach their March 23rd elections. But you get a big success like this, it's going to be great for him. New York Times lead story today: Biden and the Fed leave 1970s inflation fears behind. Administration and Fed officials argue that workers are not getting enough stimulus, and that is a larger concern than potential spikes in consumer prices. And so this is a very long story justifying spending $1.9 trillion on the biggest rescue stimulus package ever by a factor of 100%. And many people have stepped up to say, whoa, Nelly. Michael Strain at the AEI, my worry is that by pushing the economy so hard, it will lead to overheating. Lawrence Summer, former Secretary of the Treasury for Bill Clinton, former senior advisor to Barack Obama, warned that judged relative to either the macroeconomic output gap or the declines in family income, the proposed COVID-19 relief package appears very large. There are others. Austin Goolsbee, who you've heard here before, President Obama's Council of Economic Advisors chair, said, don't worry about inflation. There have been many prominent voices saying that there was about to be inflation for more than 10 years. And it's great when people predict inflation and it doesn't come until it comes. If you are a child of the 70s, if you were trying to get your first job in 1978, as I was, and the rents were going up every month, and gasoline was soaring, and food was rising, and you didn't have any money, it was a very unfortunate time. Inflation can devastate. That gives me a moment to go and check the markets this morning, brought to you by Birch Gold. If you are worried about inflation, gold is where one parks some money in order to be safe from it. Gold is at $1,823 an ounce today, which is up just a little bit from Friday. And you can buy gold direct from Birch Gold via hughgold.com or by texting my name, Hugh, to 474747. Or you don't have to spend any money. You can just roll over a portion of your retirement. If you've got $50,000, you can put $5,000 into gold, and they'll open it up for you. They'll tell you how to do it. All you have to do is go to hughgold.com or text my name, Hugh, H-U-G-H, not hard to spell, to 474747. On Friday, the Dow was up 27, the NASDAQ was up 69, and the S&P was up 18. Overseas this morning, Japan closed up 1.25 points. Hong Kong almost 2%. England and Germany are trading close to the line, a little below it this morning at this hour. A lot of predictions that today will be a good day in the markets, but you never know to the end of the day. The saddest story I read over the weekend were the people who lost, the people who had very little money and lost a lot of that little money in the GameStop frenzy of last week. If they bought gold, they'd be up a little bit this week. If they bought an index fund, they'd be up a little bit this week. There is no get-rich-quick scheme ever invented that doesn't crash. It is that simple. Gold never crashes. Sometimes market crashes, but they do come back within 3 years. But there is no scheme that does not crash. And it's always the same profile, young people who haven't been through it before, and then they never do it again. But I hope you weren't one of them. Meanwhile, head over to hughgold.com if you want to be serious about saving, hughgold.com, or go get an index fund, or text my name, Hugh, to 474747. We come back right after this. Welcome to the short week of weather, and a return finally to arguing about ordinary political things like the fact that the schools are not open and they should be open, but Joe Biden doesn't want to open them. When we return on the Hugh Hewitt Show.
This is Lon Heechen of the Hoover Institution for Townhall.com. The Biden administration announced in their first week that the U.S. is rejoining the World Health Organization. But the WHO is a flawed group, one that has performed poorly while the world has struggled with COVID-19. Early on, the group was far too deferential to China, even parroting Beijing's early claim that the virus could not be transmitted between humans. Since then, an independent panel concluded that the WHO dithered in its response, waiting too long to declare an international emergency. All the while, the WHO has continued to block Taiwan's participation because of political objections from the Chinese government, despite the fact that the world has much to learn from Taiwan's exceptional response to the virus. Before rejoining the WHO, we should have demanded some accountability and reform from the group for the $400 million in taxpayer dollars we send to it each year. It looks like we'll keep on writing blank checks to the WHO, which they are more than happy to keep cashing. I'm Lan Hee Chen.
The Pepperdine School of Public Policy, America's unique graduate program for leaders. Learn more at publicpolicy.pepperdine.edu. Trending now on The Larry Elder Show.
Mike, what is the number one reason you think people in the state want him recalled? Is it his handling of the COVID-19 crisis? Is it the way he's been ordering, things like oil and gas leases and pushing a left-wing agenda? That can't be it, because this is a left-wing state. So people must be ticked off about his handling of the COVID-19. And Mike, if that's the case, then what happens when the vaccines kick in, and what happens when Governor Newsom begins to back down, as he's already begun to back down?
California has 5 million Republicans and 9 million Democrats, but our biggest problem we have out here is there's 6.5 million NPPs, people that just aren't paying attention. Mm-hmm. They actually tend to be conservative, and the one thing that's uniting the state, believe it or not, on the right and the left, is actually Gavin himself. The number one reason, if you were to boil into 2 buckets, is everything you said, but the reality is he's a bad leader making poor decisions, mm-hmm. and COVID just amplified. We started this before COVID really hit the scene, if you will. This has just amplified the cycle, and things like dining at the French Laundry. You think that's not a bad decision? The EDD, we handed out $30 billion of money we shouldn't have. You think that's bad management? Schools not reopening. The list and reasons to recall Gavin, we have about 64 on our website, and we still couldn't fill it up, but recallgavin2020.com is long and endless. The reality is California has a bad governor making bad decisions, sending us in a bad direction for those of us that live out here. Mm-hmm. Our state's on fire, our power goes out, our taxes are too high.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today. Trending now on the Eric Metaxas Show.
We'll move on to what is the main event at the moment, which is the radicalism of the Biden agenda, pushing a lot of stuff out unilaterally and also pushing a massive stimulus. You know, we all can agree, I think we need some more COVID relief, but it's much, much bigger than that, and has a massive national minimum wage increase that would hammer the job market at a time when we should be doing everything to support it.
It is almost as if, and I hesitate to say it because it doesn't sound sane, but it's almost as if they are trying to destroy the economy. It's so bizarre. Would you give them enough credit to say that they're not trying to bring some kind of socialism or big government dependence to us via these strange means? Because that's kind of what it looks like to me.
Yeah, that is what they're trying to do. I mean, it's based on a misbegotten but sincere view of what the country should be in their minds and how the economy works. But if you get closer to where you are in the world and where I am at the moment, a place like Alabama, the median wage is $15 an hour. That means, I'm not a statistics guy, but half of people make less than that. So what's going to happen to their jobs when you mandate that they all
Welcome back, America. It's Hugh Hewitt. You know what that is? Do you know what that is? Dwayne, you know what that is?
We call it in the business a bump.
Yes, but you know what the bump is?
I have no idea.
Adam, do you? Oh, you do because I told you.
Well, I do because you told me.
Yeah, how about you, Ben and Harley?
That's a no. No, sir.
No, sir. It is the Ted Lasso theme. So now the second question is, Adam, have you watched Ted Lasso? Okay, so that's a yes. Have you watched Ted Lasso, Ben?
I have not watched Ted Lasso.
How about you, Harley?
That's a negative.
And how about you, Dwayne?
Negative.
Adam, how do you rate Ted Lasso?
I actually loved it.
That's exactly right. It is one of the best television shows I have ever seen. I am. Look, I've had a lot of names in the business over 30 years. Voice of the Reason in the West was the first one. I am now the Ted Lasso of talk radio. That's who I am. I'm Ted Lasso of talk radio, and that's it. That's who I am. What do you think, Adam? Ted Lasso of talk radio. Yeah, I don't ever. Occasionally, he does terrible things, but generally, it is the most upbeat. Adam used the term endearing. Fetching Mrs. Hewitt, just loved it. We binge watched it this weekend. It's on Apple TV. You got to get Apple TV. Does Apple TV cost money? Harley set up the TV, so I have no idea how it ended up on there. He can't make it work, though. This is the technology deficit that exists in the world, is that Harley hates old people, and so he gives us technology that we can't work. And he comes back, and we leave him alone, and he says, it's good, see you, and the door slams, and it doesn't work. And he's eating the cookies. So what it really is even with the bad technology that doesn't work, you can find it pretty easily if you have Apple TV. And then you will watch all 10 episodes. Well, I think we would have actually binge watched. We've never done that. We are disciplined TV watchers. We rarely go longer than an hour at a time. And a movie will be in there, but we don't watch back-to-back episodes. Endeavor or worse or anything that we watch. But Ted Lasso is so terrific that I'm telling you, if you have not yet had a recommendation, I don't think I've ever given a strong recommendation. I mean, I loved Endeavor too, but it's not for everybody. Ted Lasso is for everybody over the age of 18. It's got some adult humor in it. Adam, is that safe to say? Adult humor?
Oh, yeah, be careful you don't like bad language.
Yeah. Not only bad language, but it's not pornographic in the way the Game of Thrones was, but it's highly sexualized in a funny way. But it's an incredibly adult language, and it's about a British soccer team coached by an American from Wichita State. That's all I'll tell you. That's in the first 3 minutes. Now, the Wichita State Huskers live deep in my soul as an enemy because they beat the Ohio State Buckeyes in the only Elite Eight game I've ever seen at the Staples Center a few years ago. But Mike Pompeo, former Secretary of State, loves the Huskers. And that leads me to also point out, if you were watching my timeline on Twitter yesterday, you will have seen we announced the Nixon Seminar on Conservative Realism and National Security, co-chaired by former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, former National Security Advisor, Ambassador Robert O'Brien, and 15 of the smartest people in national security under the age of 50, with the honorary co-chair being Henry Kissinger. We rolled that out yesterday, and the response is terrific. It's exactly what we intend to do, which is be the loyal opposition. I organized it at the Nixon Foundation. I am not a member of it because these are actually people who've had national security jobs, and I have never had anything outside of the Department of Justice, and the White House is a national security job, and that was 30 years ago. But if you want to join the Nixon Seminar, you got to join the Nixon Foundation. So go look at nixonfoundation.org and come right back after the break. I'll tell you more about Governor Cuomo after this.
Portions of the Hugh Hewitt Show are brought to you in part by Birch Gold Group.
trending now on the Eric Metaxas Show.
We'll move on to what is the main event at the moment, which is the radicalism of the Biden agenda, pushing a lot of stuff out unilaterally and also pushing a massive stimulus. You know, we all can agree, I think we need some more COVID relief, but it's much, much bigger than that and has a massive national minimum wage increase that would hammer the job market at a time when we should be doing everything to support it.
It is almost as if, and I hesitate to say it because it doesn't sound sane, but it's almost as if they are trying to destroy the economy. It's so bizarre. Would you give them enough credit to say that they're not trying to bring some kind of socialism or big government dependence to us via these strange means? Because that's kind of what it looks like to me.
Yeah, that is what they're trying to do. I mean, it's based on a misbegotten but sincere view of what the country should be in their minds and how the economy works. But if you get closer to where you are in the world than where I am at the moment, you know, a place like Alabama, the median wage is $15 an hour. That means, I'm not a statistics guy, but you know, half of people make less than that. So what's going to happen to their jobs when you mandate that they all have to make $15 an hour? Well, they're either no longer going to have jobs, or their hours are going to be cut, or the employers are going to find a way to automate. So this just makes zero sense. I'm all in favor of a tight labor market. I think that was one of the beauties of the Trump economy when it was really cooking prior to the pandemic.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today. Trending now on the Dennis Prager Show.
Just the comments of Democrats over the last 4 years justifying violence, and there's no comparable comment from the president, President Trump, that is. Just that alone shows, I mean, hypocrisy doesn't quite do it. And yet I get emails, and it's terrific for me to get emails from people who can't stand me. It's very important to me to hear how their minds operate, to read how their minds operate, to be precise. It's an insurrection. So I just had in front of me the article from Wisconsin. This took place when was that? 2011, yeah. Nancy Pelosi praised unionists storming Wisconsin state capitol. Democrats were for occupying capitals before they were against it. Yeah, that was quite something. And they took over the place for months. The capitol, the state capitol. She praised them. She didn't call it an insurrection. She praised them. But they own the language. Do you understand? Because they own the media. They're indistinguishable. You would not know any possible difference between or among them. LA Times, Washington Post, New York Times, USA Today. They rival one another. It's a competition. Who can be more extreme? Who can pervert the news more effectively?
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today.
This is Albert Mohler for townhall.com. The American experiment is founded upon a presupposition, a prior commitment to an ordered liberty, an established order. That means policies. It means a covenant. In our case, it means a constitution. As of right now, the U.S. Constitution is the longest surviving written constitution in human history. It's a remarkable document. All of that came to the fore in violent events that interrupted the joint session of Congress to count the votes of the Electoral College. At the end of the day, our constitutional order proved itself once again resilient. But that doesn't take away any of the tragedy and the horror of what took place. It was an enormous stress test on ordered liberty, a stress test brought on by the President of the United States.
We will never give up. We will never concede. It doesn't happen. You don't concede when there's theft involved.
It's an opportunity for the right, the left, conservatives, liberals, all Americans to repudiate political violence and reaffirm, once again, our commitment to ordered liberty. It's the American way. I'm Albert Mohler.
The Pepperdine School of Public Policy, America's unique graduate program for leaders. Learn more at publicpolicy.pepperdine.edu. Trending now on America First with Sebastian Gorka.
So we have an admission of culpability.
"33 minutes after the hour, America." It's the Ted Lasso of Talk Radio. I'm Hugh Hewitt. Thank you for watching. I might just use that every single bump until I get my entire audience to watch Ted Lasso, and you'll all be happier. Now, look, here is the deal, friends. I love C.J. Box, despite the fact that he's a Yellowstone denier. And Mrs. Radio Blogger loves C.J. Box, and she steals all the books that he sends me.
Absolutely.
And Dwayne loves CJ Box, and all of us love CJ Box, and we all buy
get to
book.
call him Chuck.
I know. And he does the funny thing with his hat, which is upside down, which is a Western thing. And we love it when he comes here. And so he made a TV show, and they were called Big Sky on ABC.
Well,
now,
David,
stop! Don't interrupt the monologue. You can come back in a second. And they call it Big Sky, and I didn't watch it when it came out. Nobody told me that Chuck had made a TV show called Big Sky, and I'd up to date on Yellowstone, and they said, "Oh, it's about Montana, it's about Yellowstone." And I said, "Terrific, I'm thinking it's a Joe Pickett knockoff." And Joe Pickett was Ted Lassoing before Ted Lasso was Ted Lassoing. So Joe Pickett's another good guy. And I thought, okay, I'm very excited. So I sit down, and it turns out the only way to watch Big Sky is to buy from Amazon Prime the entire season, which I dutifully did, because why not give Chuck Box another $24? I have to buy his book every time because Mrs. Radio Blogger steals my copy, so why not? And by the way, you should go and find the very first Joe Pickett book and start there. But you see, CJ is tricky. He not only writes a Joe Pickett book a year, he writes another book a year. And sometimes they're in 3s or 4s or they're standalones. And the scariest book I've ever read, novel, because I never read The Exorcist, wouldn't do it, wouldn't be prudent, not going to do it, is called The Highway. And it's truly terrifying. And you'll never look at a trucker. And I got some truckers listening right now. They're always listening. They're leaving Lake Elsinore, or they're getting out of Menifee, and they're heading out from all of our friends in the Inland Empire are getting on the road this morning, heading north, south, east, west. And they know I love them, and I talk to truckers up north in Sacramento. You know I love you guys and gals, a few of you that are out there. And The Highway is about a bad guy in a big truck. And it goes on for about 3 books. And it's the scariest book ever. And the scariest series ever. Finally, my brother-in-law, sort of, Robin, called me up and said, "Would you tell Chuck to kill this guy off, please?" And because it's so scary. You can imagine, I never watched Silence of the Lambs, right? I'm not going to watch that either. So Carl, the Steelers fan, and Chuck, and Radio Blogger all egg me on into watching Big Sky, and they're leading me to believe it's about Joe Pickett. It's not about Joe Pickett. It's The Highway. They adapted The Highway, and I bought the whole thing for $24, and 20 minutes into it, the fetching Mrs. Hewitt looks at me and says, "I'm not watching this," gets up and leaves the room. 25 minutes into it, I turn it off when the girls pull over in Yellowstone. That's all I'm not going to be any spoiler. And I said, I'm not watching this. There is no way I am watching The Highway on TV. Not now, not ever, never. I love you, Chuck, but you tricked me. And Dwayne, you tricked me. You made me think this was Joe Pickett. And it's not. It's the highway. Not a chance am I watching this on TV. Yeah, you're silent.
No,
you're guilty. You're guilty.
Nothing about what you said in that setup. Nothing was accurate.
You totally
Nothing
tricked me
was
into
accurate.
watching this. Is it about the highway?
Yes.
Okay,
as
so I guess I rest my case. Turn off his camera. He's banished. He came in to gloat today. Because they got me to watch the highway when they knew I would never watch the highway, and I paid $24 to Amazon.
It was
Prime.
never not about. Do you know what does Big Sky stand for?
Big Sky stands for Joe Pickett.
No.
Two words.
No.
Turn off his camera. Turn him off. Go. I'm going to hit the shortstop. He is
That
banished.
doesn't mute me. That only mutes you.
Then I need a second button.
Well, you don't have one of
All
those.
right, I got to go to Andrew Cuomo. Andrew Cuomo is the worst governor in the history of New York. His negligence killed 18,000 people. Now, actually, I don't believe that, but I thought I would say it to get your attention. The virus killed 18,000 people. Like everybody else in office, Andrew Cuomo didn't know what he was doing, but because of the narrative-making Manhattan Beltway media elite, they turned him into a hero, and he was just as incompetent as everyone else in Europe and America, where this sort of thing has never happened before. EU, by the way, is totally bollocksed up. But the death rate is falling in the United States. And finally, people have figured out that Cuomo's handling of the virus with old people condemned a lot of thousands of elderly people to an early death. So Cuomo goes out and gives a press conference this weekend. Cut number 5.
On my emergency powers, first, emergency powers have nothing to do with nursing homes. I have taken hundreds of actions. The legislature can reverse any action that I take, not even by a bill, just by passing 50% of the Assembly and the Senate. They have never reversed a single action. The virus cannot be managed by state boundaries. We've learned that. It can't be managed by county boundaries. We've learned that. I've always consulted with the legislature. I consult with other politicians. I have no problem consulting with the legislature. Anyone who wants to stand up and raise their hand and say, here's my position, great. But these are public health decisions. They're not local political decisions. And they have to be made on a public health basis. This virus is serious. And I understand these decisions are difficult politically. I get that. It's difficult to close schools. It's difficult to close restaurants. It's difficult to impose curfews. But otherwise, people die. And these decisions should not be politicized. If you made these decisions by a poll, none of them would happen.
Now, Andrew Cuomo is setting up the big excuse. Here comes the big excuse, cut number 6.
I want to clarify facts on the nursing homes, which has been an ongoing discussion. New York, as everybody knows, was ground zero for COVID, and nursing homes were and still are ground zero for COVID. And losing a loved one is very, very painful. Losing a loved one in a nursing home during this situation was extraordinarily painful. There was no visitation. You couldn't be with the person. You couldn't talk to the person. It was hard to get them on the phone. People in nursing homes are not as conversant and facile on Zooms and on FaceTime. I mean, it doesn't work that way. So I understand fully how difficult it has been, and I want to make sure people have all the facts, the information. This past year, there is a toxic political environment, and everything gets politicized, and there's political spin, and then there are facts. Two very different things. And I just want to make sure people have facts. Last August, Department of Justice sent a letter to Democratic governors, 4 of them, New York, New Jersey, Michigan, Pennsylvania, asking for information on public nursing homes. New York State Legislature also sent a letter asking for information on nursing homes.
Now, let's keep going because here comes the big excuse. Cut number 7.
March 25th. That's right when the New York City Health and Hospitals Elmhurst Hospital collapsed. It was national news. I remember it like yesterday. And we're watching the TV every night and watching Italy collapse and people die because they can't get into a hospital. We're watching China with a hospital capacity issue where they were building thousands of new hospital beds. That's what was going on. That's why the CDC and that's why CMS made those decisions. And at the time, CDC, CMS, there were White House task forces, there were daily briefings. Everyone was focused on this issue. This was not a little issue. All the best minds were looking at it. Fact, of the 613 nursing homes, we have 613 nursing homes in the state. 365 received a person from a hospital. Of the 365 that received a person from this March 25th guidance, which was then superseded in May, 98% of those 365 already had COVID in their facility. COVID did not get into the nursing homes by people coming from hospitals. COVID got into the nursing homes by staff walking into the nursing home.
So he's blaming the nursing home staff for his cover-up. Get it? Ron DeSantis went on Fox with Tucker last night and said this, cut number 1.
Well, look, Tucker, we in Florida, we had the exact opposite order. We said you can't, a hospital, send a COVID-positive nursing home resident back into the nursing home because that is the most vulnerable population, and you obviously would put them in serious risk. But what we also did after the first few weeks, we established COVID-only nursing units. So if you had somebody test positive at a nursing home, they could be safely transferred and isolated, recover, then go back so that the other residents were protected. So we really viewed that as the tip of the spear when you're dealing with COVID, because the fact of the matter is it's not killing a lot of 18-year-olds. It is tending to kill people who are very elderly and very, very ill.
It'll be fascinating, and this is another show, but to find out why they did that, because everything you said is rooted in the science, but also in common sense. Anyway, I appreciate.
Well, you want to know why, Tucker? The reason is because around mid to late March, we were all given models saying you're not going to have any hospital beds in 5 days. Every governor got those models. I questioned the assumptions under those models. I didn't think that they were valid. And I said, I'm not going to construct our policy around that. But even if I was wrong, I would build more beds somewhere rather than throw these elderly people back into the fire of a nursing home where they could contaminate and infect a lot of other people. So it was just an important judgment that we were all called upon to make. And I think Florida did it right. And I think obviously other states took a different tact.
Other states like New York, led by Andrew Cuomo. Diplomatic Governor DeSantis, but well done. Here is ReliefFactor.com. Time for me to tell you, first time of the week live. 8.5 miles yesterday. I rarely do a half mile, but I got stuck out on I ended up talking to Ambassador O'Brien about the Nixon seminar through the whole thing. And if you're watching on YouTube, you see there are the 4 pills right there. You can see them on YouTube. And I'd like to show people stone cold coffee to go with the rest of the country. The people under blankets of snow in Dallas and Houston, you know I'm cold too. At least my coffee's as cold as your house. And down they go. Karen Kirkman, Resveratrol Omega. Go and get your ReliefFactor.com today. $19.95 gets you a 3-week supply. And even if you did 8.5 miles yesterday, you'll feel better today. Be right back.
Trending now on The Larry Elder Show.
Now, my next guest is involved in the effort to recall the governor of California, an effort that at one time seemed pretty fanciful, but no longer. You know it's getting serious when the governor's staff begins to call the effort a coup and suggest that it is being led in part by white nationalists. My guest is a vet of distribution, sales, and marketing, has served in senior exec roles at places like Corporate Express and Staples. He's now applying his expertise to state politics to create a team of volunteers and to create some sort of hopeful movement for conservatism in this state of California, where there isn't a single Republican elected statewide. Please welcome coalition founding member of Recall Gavin 2020, Mike Netter. Mike, how are you?
Well, Larry, I'm doing great today, except Gavin Newsom's still my governor, which I hope to change pretty soon.
You know, Mike, I've heard different things about how the recall effort is going. I heard you're just a smidge short of the signatures. I've heard you got the signatures. What's the truth?
Let me explain. We need 12% of the people that voted for governor last time, which is technically 1,475,000 signatures. We're actually at that figure, but before the public gets too cocky, because they have to be verified signatures, the reality is we need 1.8 to 2 million of them. The good news is we have 5 weeks to go. And you want to hear some more amazing news, Larry?
Sure.
This is not only the largest initiative in American history, this is 90% powered by volunteers, not by the big political machine.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today. Trending now on the Eric Metaxas Show.
Where do you see this ending? In other words, I fear that all of these ideologies are a snake swallowing its own tail. In other words, they basically destroy. They don't have the beginning of a clue what they would want to replace it with. Marxism, I really can't imagine what they're suggesting.
What they're suggesting is a woke ideology of so-called anti-racism that is a profound misnomer. That's really a profound race consciousness. And you know, our institutions and our politics are downstream of culture, and they are destroying our culture one pillar at a time. And an extremely important element of culture throughout all human history is memory. It's knowing who you are as a people, what you're about, what your story is. And when Jesse Jackson 30 years ago had that ridiculous chant, you know, hey, hey, ho, ho, Western Civ has to go, that was really the first battle cry in this fight to make us forget who we are. And it's not just forgetting, it's also lying about who we are. We see this particularly in the 1619 Project and its poisonous view of America that wants to make the American founding about slavery, when the American founding was an incredible advance in human civilization and enlightenment and liberty, and created in the North a movement.
Welcome back, America. Hugh Hewitt. Coming up next hour, Congressman Michael Waltz, for whom Hewitt the Younger works now. I need to ask my next guest, David Drucker. Have you met Michael Waltz, David?
I have not.
He has introduced a resolution, which was all over Fox yesterday and some of the international websites, to boycott the Olympics because it's a genocidal regime that has suppressed Hong Kong, and that we ought not to go to the Winter Olympics in China in 2022. That is a step up from the Rick Scott resolution urging the IOC to move the Olympics. It doesn't appear they're moving, and so Congressman Waltz has led the way to call on a boycott of China. Where do you think that will go?
I do not know, but I tend to think that it won't end up coming to fruition. You know, I'm old enough to have lived through the 1980 boycott of the Moscow Olympics. And this is always a tough call because athletes, you know, American athletes among them, they're not in control of these things, and they're clearly not players in geopolitics. They prepare for the Olympics, and it is one way for the country, for countries around the world to sort of come together and for a moment put aside all of these disagreements. And occasionally the Olympics are held in countries that don't deserve them, that mistreat their own people, that are belligerent to their neighbors. And, there's an argument to make for this on both sides. I rarely say there's an argument to make for something on both sides, but this is one where over the years I've never been able to sort of decide how I feel about it. I remember feeling as a kid very sympathetic to the athletes that had to miss out on the Moscow Olympics. And then, of course, in '84, when the Summer Olympics were in L.A., the Eastern Bloc, the Soviet Bloc, boycotted out of revenge. Didn't seem to ruin it for me as a spectator, although I did miss beating the Soviets in basketball, but so it goes.
Yeah, I remember those both very well. The Olympic connection for kids is very strong because they have role models and they love watching it. And when they're just a little bit older, they say, I wonder if I could have ever been that kind of an athlete if I'd bothered to even try. And all the athletes love it and all the athletes hate it. I know some athletes who didn't go in 1980, Bill and Julie, I'm talking about you. And a lot of them hate it. But this is a genocidal regime. And unlike 1936, where the anti-Semitic, anti-Jewish laws had gone into place, but about which we did not know about death camps and slave labor and coming war, we know that China has put the Uyghurs into concentration camps. We know their inhumane policies. We know what they've done in Hong Kong. This is actually at least as bad as Moscow, which had invaded Afghanistan. So do you think Democrats will support the Waltz option?
Well, I don't think Democrats are going to get ahead of President Biden on an issue of foreign policy. But I think that the issue of how the United States is going to counter and deal with China runs much deeper. Because let's assume, for the sake of argument, we were to go ahead and boycott the China Olympics. We still are so intertwined with China economically. And we still deal with them on so many levels. We then have to ask ourselves, how deep and far do we want to go in countering China's behavior? I think that it's something that needs to be done, and it's possible that something symbolic like this might raise some eyebrows and make a dent in how they function. But there's so much that needs to be done when it comes to China and how they're functioning in the Asia-Pacific, in how they're moving around the world, trying to buy friends. The United States really needs to make a commitment to counter a regime that is growing and that is not weak the way the Soviet Union was. Its underpinnings are not necessarily made of sand, and I think the American people have to decide how much of a commitment they want to make to dealing with China. So this isn't necessarily a bad idea. I don't think Democrats are going to get ahead of President Biden, but I think as a country, we still haven't really figured out how far we want to go in dealing with the problem that China is.
Now, given Team Biden's rhetoric about human rights, it's not the conservative realism of Michael Pompeo and the new Nixon seminar and Robert O'Brien. It's a human rights first approach. Can they actually ignore concentration camps in China? Do you think they can get away with doing that?
No, they can't. And I think they're going to have to find a way to craft a policy that shows that the United States is serious about opposing China and penalizing China for how they're operating. I'd also say, and you followed Secretary Pompeo and obviously you know Robert O'Brien quite well. Their rhetoric on how the Chinese have dealt with the Uyghurs has been very human rights focused, which was counter most of their administration's otherwise realistic approach to these sorts of regimes around the world. So there seems to be an opportunity for consensus on both sides of the aisle when it comes to dealing with China's human rights abuses. It'll be interesting to see if that can lead to some agreed upon policy.
It will be, because Secretary of State Blinken, when testifying, the genocide declaration required a lot of process, and it caught up with the Blinken confirmation hearing, and he declared he agreed with that. So if both Republicans and Democrats agree that a genocide is underway, I don't know how we go to their Olympics. I really don't. I think Congressman Waltz is right. You'll hear him on the next hour. David Drucker, thank you. Follow him on Twitter. David M. Drucker. Follow me to hour 2 of the Hugh Hewitt Show.
Trending now on America First with Sebastian Gorka.
But who cares? 33, 28, died in a hospital, died in a nursing home. They died.
Who cares? They died. Remind you of anyone? Benghazi, Hillary. What difference does it make? It makes a difference. From the New York Post headline, Cuomo aide Melissa DeRosa admits they hid nursing home data so feds wouldn't find out. Let's ask somebody who's definitely got an opinion. Coming from hosting his own show on Fox News. Not quite. It was only a 25-minute segment, but it was fabulous. From Congressional District Number 1 in New York. Great friend of the show, Congressman Lee Zeldin. Welcome.
It's good to be back with you, Seb.
Congrats on that great hit. I have to ask you, I'm just going to be super cynical for a second. This is a guy who was given what? He was given an Emmy as governor for his use of TV briefings in his handling of the coronavirus. Now we find out they hid the stats of the deaths from the feds so they wouldn't get in trouble. Is Governor Cuomo ever going to face any consequences?
An Emmy, and he wrote a self-congratulatory book on leadership of his response, and he started selling this ridiculous poster. I don't know if you remember this story, but if you haven't seen it, it was absurd. Several months ago, praising himself and the response, and that when he says "who cares," what you think about are the lives impacted, the families, the people who lost their mom or dad, grandmother or grandfather.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today. Trending now on The Mike Gallagher Show.
What's with these Republicans? I would just give $1 and a donut to figure out what's in the mind of somebody like Senator Bill Cassidy. Here's cut 5. This is the same guy who was last week, just the other day, on with Meet the Press and Chuck Todd.
The president wasn't there. He wasn't allowed counsel. They didn't amass evidence. In 5 hours, they kind of judged, and boom, he's impeached. Now, I'm told that under the Watergate, under the Clinton impeachments, there were truckloads of information. Here, it was a video. There was no process. I mean, it's almost like, if it happened in the Soviet Union, you would have called it a show trial.
That's the guy. That was last week. That's the guy who yesterday voted with the Democrats to proceed with the trial because he didn't like Bruce Castor. And listen, Bruce Castor did a terrible job. President Trump was said to be very angry behind the scenes. Fox News quotes sources as saying Trump was furious and beyond angry over his defense team's showing on day 1 of his second impeachment trial, despite his ultimate acquittal almost certain. The sources who spent time with President Trump said he was particularly incensed with the effort thus far by his attorney, Bruce Castor. Do you get the feeling that the reason he hasn't had a strong showing by his lawyers is because no attorney wants to touch this thing?
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today. Trending now on The Charlie Kirk Show.
One of the things I wanted to go through is how the Democrats tampered with evidence. And I was going through it with our team. I said, you do know that Eric Swalwell, who's a lover of Fang Fang, the Chinese Communist Party spy, he tampered with evidence. And David Schoen, to his great credit, came out and proved that point, that Eric Swalwell, and this is why this is not a trial. This is a Hollywood Broadway production. That's all this is. So in a real trial, you'd say, Your Honor, this evidence is tampered with. So you had Swalwell, the lover of Fang Fang, who came out and said that Donald Trump called for the cavalry to come. Cavalry. Now, anyone in the Christian world knows that there's a difference between Calvary and Calvary. I sometimes, without unintentionally, mispronounce one or the other, but I know the difference. Calvary, C-A-L, cavalry. One is where Christ was crucified. The other is horse-mounted military. So Eric Swalwell reads Jennifer Lawrence's tweet, who says, Mr. President, the cavalry is coming. So Eric Swalwell then comes out and says, well, on the House impeachment floor, you see here, President Trump, he was calling in for reinforcements, and the cavalry is coming. Now, to an untrained eye, you're like, well, there might be something, maybe there might be. It's nothing.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today. Trending now on The Larry Elder Show.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm engaging in whataboutism. Here I am bringing up an example to show my point. I can't do that. It shows you hypocrisy, selective outrage. Hillary Clinton can parade around for 4 years and call the election illegitimate and say it was stolen. And nobody said, hey, excuse me, you're giving energy to Donald Trump down the road to say the same thing, so maybe you ought to back. Nobody said anything. You know why? Because they believed it was stolen. 78% of Democrats believe that the Russians interfered, which everybody knows they did and has acknowledged, but that they changed the outcome of the election. And Jay Johnson, the then head of the Homeland Security Department under Obama, testified there's no evidence whatsoever. We haven't reached any kind of conclusion that the outcome was changed. We know that no voting tallies were changed. They tried, but they failed. Yet 78% of Democrats, and they get their news from CNN, their feed from Facebook, New York Times, and 78% of Democrats have convinced themselves that but for whatever Russia did, Donald Trump would not be president, even though the intel community has never reached that conclusion. Am I not supposed to bring that up? It says something about your reason and your logic. I said that yesterday about the O.J. Simpson case. How do you respect a bunch of people who look at the same evidence of overwhelming guilt and say the man was innocent man who was framed? How do you respect somebody like that? How do you respect their judgment, their mentality, their ability to reason? Same thing over here.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today.
Morning glory, America. Bonjour, hi, Canada. It's Hugh Hewitt in California, not suffering the way you are across the country, especially now in Maine. Most of Texas has got the hamsters on the wheel to get the radio show up and going, but I feel for you. Joined by Byron York of the Washington Examiner, also with Fox News. Good morning, Byron. Are you under, has the snow passed D.C. by?
Yes, it has. It was never very bad. Had a little ice. The ice melted. End of story.
All right. Not Texas. In Texas, I like the Babylon Bee story. No. Everybody who left California now feels at home in Texas because they have no power. Let me ask you, Byron, before I go to other stories.
But it's renewable non-power.
It's renewable. Okay. All the big turbines froze. Never saw that one coming. So, Byron, Congressman Michael Waltz will be on later in the show. Hewitt, the younger, works for him. I try and say that often. But he posed a resolution yesterday in the session of the Congress that has generated a lot of attention at National Review, other places, as to the United States should boycott the China Olympics in 2022, the Winter Olympics. I'm looking at the headline in the Financial Times: China targets rare earth export curbs to hobble U.S. defense industry. And of course, before Secretary Pompeo left, he oversaw the finding of genocide in China. Tony Blinken agreed with it. So Waltz has brought this resolution. Do you think Democrats will join him, and do you think the United States will boycott the 2022 Olympics?
No, I don't think Democrats will join him. And no, barring unforeseen events, I don't think we will boycott. I listened to your conversation with David Drucker about this, so there's a lot of uncertainty in it. But, people of a certain age do remember this happening with the Soviet Union. And they also look at the cases of American athletes who, train, many of whom they're amateurs. This is not something they get rich doing. They train for 4 years with one goal in mind, and the personal stories there. So my guess is it won't, but we'll have to see whether Waltz can get any support.
No, I was talking to Ambassador O'Brien yesterday because the Nixon Library rolled out the Nixon seminar, and we were talking about pundits, and this leads into our next conversation about where media goes next. My view of a great pundit and an analyst is someone who can accurately and fairly summarize the position of the opposing side, even as they disagree with it. And you just put out the position of the opposing side, which is athletes train their whole lives for a shot at Olympic gold and the world suspend politics. David noted that as well. But I would add, in 1980, they had invaded Afghanistan and subjugated Afghanistan, but they were not eliminating the Afghan people, though it would eventually become that, a genocidal-like campaign. We know what China is doing to the Uyghurs, and we know what they've done to Hong Kong. Isn't this different, Byron?
No, I don't think so. I think, I think the invasion of Afghanistan, that's an actual act of war. I just don't think that you're going to have a large part of the American public support boycotting the Olympics in this case. I just don't.
And last question about the Waltz.
Something really changes.
Last question about the Waltz option. Will any Democrats, especially those who like to make a show of attachment to human rights, join on and co-sign the Waltz resolution and the Waltz option?
Now, that's a good question. I'd have to think about, are there some districts in the United States, in, a congressional district, about 750,000 people, where that would really be popular? And I can't really think of one, but I don't feel like I should answer that right now, because there might be. There certainly might be.
Let me turn to the media. What yesterday the Nixon Library rolled out was the Nixon Seminar, of which I'm not a member. I'm just facilitating it. Co-chaired by Secretary Pompeo, Ambassador O'Brien, and Honorary Chair Henry Kissinger, 15 of the smartest national security people on our side of the aisle, ours being the Republican conservative side, to talk monthly about foreign policy, national security. And we got a lot of attention. That's great. And if members of the press want to join the Nixon Foundation, they can watch it each month. Question will be, will they ever accurately represent what is said there? And then O'Brien and I got to talking about, are there any honest pundits left? Does anyone in the media, Beltway Manhattan media, present company accepted, regularly appear on television who can accurately state and fairly present the proposition of the other side? What do you think, Byron?
I'm trying to think who is fair. There are conservatives who have respect for some media figures. What you call it, corporate, or what's
Manhattan Beltway media elite?
Yeah. There's going to be a complete divide on that. I just think as a matter of fact, I was just looking at an article, and it was on FoxNews.com. And it was how the media fact checkers are completely ignoring what Vice President Harris is saying about the vaccine, which is that in many ways the administration was starting from scratch on fighting this virus that has been here for a year. So it calls out for fact-checking, and as you know, Dr. Fauci specifically, several days ago, specifically said, no, obviously we're not starting from scratch. And if you look at, say, I'll give a plug here, the Bloomberg Vaccine Tracker, which I find very valuable, you'll see a line that's just been going up since December. It goes up prior to January 20th. It continues going up after January 20th. And it's just going up. And clearly, Vice President Harris would have you believe that the assent rate prior to January 20th was an accident, and the assent rate after January 20th is the result of careful national planning. But this is something that cries out for media fact-checking. We haven't seen a word about it.
And we also need to know why Officer Sicknick died. I believe felony murder would still apply. I believe he is dead as a result of the riot. But I have been stunned to learn what I've learned in the last 2 days from Andy McCarthy and others.
Well, actually, I wrote about this quite a while ago. On I think it was January 28th. I sent a list of questions to the Capitol Police, because not only the circumstances of Officer Sicknick's death, but there was so much we don't know. I asked, for example, did Capitol Police confiscate firearms from the rioters? If so, how many, what types? Did Capitol Police discharge their weapons in any other situation other than the Ashley Babbitt shooting? Did any rioters do that? What were the circumstances of Officer Sicknick's death? Is there an autopsy report? Will it be released? And I waited a week. I gave him a week. I followed up. I called. I emailed, and got no response. Absolutely no response. And you know, some people said, "Oh, he's a Sicknick truther," blah blah blah. But the fact is, these are basic questions about this. I asked about the extent of Capitol Police injuries. How many were injured? What were those injuries? And you can piece together some information from things that the Capitol Police Officers Union has said, from the criminal cases that are being made against individual rioters. But it's outrageous that they have not released any information.
I agree, because I've been making statements that people are going to be guilty of felony murder. And I don't know that they will be, because the fact pattern that supports felony murder requires proximate cause. I mean, that's a legal question. I don't think people will understand it, but I've been just misspeaking. Byron, where is the media going to go, by the way? Now that those that are Trump addicted, and I call TDS and TA are different maladies, but TA, Trump addiction, is real, and as TDS is, what are they going to do?
You know, I kind of think in terms of the end of the O.J. Simpson trial, if you remember that, it was pre-Fox, pre-MSNBC, but there was CNN, there was CNBC, and they covered the trial 24/7.
And there was court TV. Yep.
Live when it was happening, and they talked about it for the other 16 hours of the day. So the question is, well, there's going to be a verdict. And what are you going to do? And what we saw was, after the verdict, they just continued to cover the O.J. trial as if it were still going on. I mean, it took months and months for them to sort of wean themselves off O.J. And I was listening. I was in the car a lot yesterday listening to cable news coverage. And certainly CNN and MSNBC were just talking about Trump the whole time. So my guess is, you talk about Trump addiction. Will they kick their Trump addiction? No, they'll just.
Hey, Byron, can you stick around for a second segment? I just want to ask one more question about this.
Of course.
Good. Byron York will be right back afterwards. I want to ask him, if someone kicks it, who will first and who will be second? Because I think I know who will be first. Don't go anywhere, America. It's the Hugh Hewitt Show.
Portions of the Hugh Hewitt Show brought to you by Sierra Pacific Mortgage. For more info, call 888-888-1172.
This is Lon Chen of the Hoover Institution for townhall.com. The Biden administration announced in their first week that the U.S. is rejoining the World Health Organization. But the WHO is a flawed group, one that has performed poorly while the world has struggled with COVID-19. Early on, the group was far too deferential to China, even parroting Beijing's early claim that the virus could not be transmitted between humans. Since then, an independent panel concluded that the WHO dithered in its response, waiting too long to declare an international emergency. All the while, the WHO has continued to block Taiwan's participation because of political objections from the Chinese government, despite the fact that the world has much to learn from Taiwan's exceptional response to the virus. Before rejoining the WHO, we should have demanded some accountability and reform from the group for the $400 million in taxpayer dollars we send to it each year. It looks like we'll keep on writing blank checks to the WHO, which they are more than happy to keep cashing. I'm Lon Chen.
The Pepperdine School of Public Policy, America's unique graduate program for leaders. Learn more at publicpolicy.pepperdine.edu. Trending now on The Larry Elder Show.
Mike, what is the number one reason you think people in the state want him recalled? Is it his handling of the COVID-19 crisis? Is it the way he's been ordering, things like oil and gas leases and pushing a left-wing agenda? That can't be it, because this is a left-wing state. So people must be ticked off about his handling of the COVID-19. And Mike, if that's the case, then what happens when the vaccines kick in, and what happens when Governor Newsom begins to back down, as he's already begun to back down?
California has 5 million Republicans, 9 million Democrats, but our biggest problem we have out here is there's 6.5 million NPPs, people that just aren't paying attention. Mm-hmm. They actually tend to be conservative, and the one thing that's uniting the state, believe it or not, on the right and the left, is actually Gavin himself. The number one reason, if you were to boil into two buckets, is everything you said, but the reality is he's a bad leader making poor decisions, mm-hmm. and COVID just amplified. We started this before COVID really hit the scene, if you will. This has just amplified the cycle, and things like dining at the French Laundry. You think that's not a bad decision? The EDD, oops, we handed out $30 billion of money we shouldn't have. You think that's bad management? Schools not reopening. The list and reasons to recall Gavin, we have about 64 on our website, and we still couldn't fill it up, but recallgavin2020.com is long and endless. The reality is California has a bad governor making bad decisions, sending us in a bad direction. For those of us that live out here, mm-hmm. Our state's on fire, our power goes out, our taxes are too high.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today. Trending now on the Eric Metaxas Show.
We'll move on to what is the main event at the moment, which is the radicalism of the Biden agenda, pushing a lot of stuff out unilaterally and also pushing a massive stimulus. You know, we all can agree, I think we need some more COVID relief, but it's much, much bigger than that, and has a massive national minimum wage increase that would hammer the job market at a time when we should be doing everything to support it.
It is almost as if, and I hesitate to say it because it doesn't sound sane, but it's almost as if they are trying to destroy the economy. It's so bizarre. Would you give them enough credit to say that they're not trying to bring some kind of socialism or big government dependence to us via these strange means? Because that's kind of what it looks like to me.
Yeah, that is what they're trying to do. I mean, it's based on a misbegotten but sincere view of what the country should be in their minds and how the economy works. But if you get closer to where you are in the world than where I am at the moment, a place like Alabama, the median wage is $15 an hour. That means, I'm not a statistics guy, but half of people make less than that. So what's going to happen to their jobs when you mandate that they all have to make $15 an hour? Well, they're either no longer going to have jobs.
Welcome back, America. It's Hugh Hewitt with Byron York. Follow him at Byron York on Twitter, in the Washington Examiner on Fox. The question I asked him to stay over for Many, many news channels are addicted to President Trump, former President Trump. Who will break away first and second? I'm going to answer the first one, Byron. Morning Drive Talk Radio will, because our demographics demand that we do breaking news, and the news of the day as people go to work. That has to be done or you lose your audience. That's what drives our audience in the morning. People want to know the headlines and they want some commentary. Who will be second?
Boy, I'm glad you gave me a head start on this question, and I still don't know the answer. But here's what I think will happen. I think the reason that a news organization will pull away from 24/7 Trump mania will be not about Trump, but about Joe Biden. That there will be the argument that the new president should not be a bit player in Washington as everyone fixates on the former president, especially as his time in office proceeds further into the past and the periods of time in which he doesn't really make any news grow longer and longer. So the question is, I think it would be daytime news reporting on cable TV, and I think the last to give it up would be the primetime audiences who have really become extremely addicted to the Trump event.
We have a left-wing primetime audience on CNN and MSNBC, and we have a right-wing primetime audience on Fox. Do you think all three of them stay addicted?
No. I think Fox News moves on. I mean, look at the coverage yesterday of Andrew Cuomo's news conference on the nursing home deaths in New York.
Exactly what I opened with on the first hour. Exactly what I opened with, because it's the news of the day.
Yeah, and all three covered it, but I think Fox covered it more because they moved on because the Trump acquittal was 2 days earlier. So no, I think Fox will move on and cover the news of the day, which is what news organizations do, and that'll mostly be whatever the Biden administration and Democrats in Congress are doing.
What does Byron York do?
I move on too. I think obviously Trump is going to be in the news if all of these threats of criminal charges against him, come true. If the Southern District of New York does something, or if the Manhattan District Attorney's Office does something, or the state of Georgia does something in terms of charging him, obviously that will be news, and those charges will have to be looked into. And there is going to be, lasting interest in the January 6th riot. We just had Nancy Pelosi announce a commission, and there should be a really extensive investigation of everything that happened there. So that's going to stay in the news, but everything just moves on. And
and the presidential campaign. I got to sneak in a bonus question, Byron. I was laying out a column for the Post, wherein I think the three front runners in 2024 are named Tom Cotton, Ron DeSantis, and Mike Pompeo in that order. And Cotton gets the Lincoln lane, and Pompeo gets the Grant lane, and DeSantis gets the Sherman/Sheridan lane in terms of how they will wage their campaigns. And I don't know where Governor Newsom goes, and I don't know what happens to Tim Scott. I don't have any argument for analogy, but what do you make of my three front runners who are fusion GOP?
Well, I think they're all good. I think there's more lanes than that, and there is a sort of media moderate lane that you're leaving out that Nikki Haley, for example, might be in. So I think you need to leave that. Even if it doesn't get as much support among Republican voters, it'll certainly get a lot.
Is that the Copperhead lane, Byron?
I think the Civil War Reconstruction sort of images are just like, no, not going there.
Byron York, thank you. Follow Byron on Twitter at Byron York. I will be. I got to go do my market update. Brought to you by AndrewandTodd.com. Actually, I don't have to do a market update, do I? I do. Okay. Oh, it's Tuesday. That's why I do. Byron, you're right. I'll do it after the break. I do have to do a market update because it's Tuesday. I'll do it at the end of Admiral James Stavridis, who is next, America. Don't go anywhere. The Admiral joins me, per usual, on this Tuesday edition of the Hugh Hewitt Show.
Don't forget to sign up for the Hugh-niverse. All of Hugh's broadcasts on demand, the after show, which in my opinion is worth the price all by itself, Dwayne FM, and all sorts of bonus content. www.hugniverse.com.
Trending now on the Dennis Prager Show.
Just the comments of Democrats over the last 4 years justifying violence, and there is no comparable comment from the president, President Trump, that is. Just that alone shows, I mean, hypocrisy doesn't quite do it. And yet I get emails, and it's terrific for me to get emails from people who can't stand me. It's very important to me to hear how their minds operate, to read how their minds operate, to be precise. It's an insurrection. So I just had in front of me the article from Wisconsin. This took place when was that? 2011, yeah. Nancy Pelosi praised unionists storming Wisconsin state capitol. Democrats were for occupying capitals before they were against it. Yeah, that's quite something. And they took over the place for months. The capitol, the state capitol. She praised them. She didn't call it an insurrection. She praised them. But they own the language, do you understand? Because they own the media. They're indistinguishable. You would not know any possible difference between or among them. LA Times, Washington Post, New York Times, USA Today. They rival one another. It's a competition. Who can be more extreme? Who can pervert the news more effectively?
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today.
This is Albert Mohler for townhall.com. The American experiment is founded upon a presupposition, a prior commitment to an ordered liberty, an established order. That means policies. It means a covenant. In our case, it means a constitution. As of right now, the U.S. Constitution is the longest surviving written constitution in human history. It's a remarkable document. All of that came to the fore in violent events that interrupted the joint session of Congress to count the votes of the Electoral College. At the end of the day, our constitutional order proved itself once again resilient. But that doesn't take away any of the tragedy and the horror of what took place. It was an enormous stress test on ordered liberty, a stress test brought on by the President of the United States.
We will never give up. We will never concede. It doesn't happen. You don't concede when there's theft involved.
It's an opportunity for the right, the left, conservatives, liberals, all Americans to repudiate political violence and reaffirm, once again, our commitment to ordered liberty. It's the American way. I'm Albert Mohler.
The Pepperdine School of Public Policy, America's unique graduate program for leaders. Learn more at publicpolicy.pepperdine.edu. Trending now on America First with Sebastian Gorka.
So we have an admission of culpability. We have 14,000 dead in the homes. Where do New Yorkers go next who lost a husband and wife? What's the next step, Congressman?
I would say a few things. One is you have law enforcement, you have prosecutors at other levels of government that can take actions, the first thing. Right. Secondly, the New York Republican congressional delegations, and our numbers are increasing. Claudia Tenney won her, was finally certified the winner of her race and was sworn in this past week. 8 of us today sent a letter to the Department of Justice with regards to this obstruction of justice case that's emerging, calling on the Department of Justice to investigate this charge. Now, you have a confirmation hearing that's coming up. Merrick Garland, the nominee to be the next Attorney General. Right. Inside of that confirmation hearing is a great opportunity for senators to maybe ask about this letter, or put aside my letter that was sent with my colleagues today, just asking about the underlying issue, and you can't allow, with all these different confirmation hearings, the person who's answering your question to just not give you any answer on any of this. We need to get assurances that something like this is going to be pursued. Don't do it for me. Don't do it for a member of Congress. You're doing it for those thousands of families.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today. Trending now on The Mike Gallagher Show.
The impeachment trial will proceed. Dun, dun, dun. Big vote yesterday. That's one headline, USA Today. Huge font, trial to proceed. Chilling video, managers open by reviving riot. And then the vote was taken, 56-44. 6.
Welcome back, America. It's Hugh Hewitt. I'm joined now by Admiral James Stavridis, retired United States Navy. He is, of course, former Allied Supreme Commander, former head of Southern Command. Good morning, Admiral. How are you?
Doing great, Hugh. At least we're not freezing down here in Florida like everybody else seems to be.
I know, poor old Texas. They are really getting slammed. Admiral, I want to play for you. In October of 2019, the People's Republic of China had a big military parade. And I found the audio from a report in the Telegraph, which leads me to my next story. So let me play the audio for the benefit of our audience. Roll it, gentlemen.
China has showed off some of the most advanced weaponry in the world with a huge military parade in Beijing. In a full display of power for its rivals, they've unveiled a new range of high-tech military weapons for the very first time. One of those is this intercontinental ballistic missile. It can carry up to 10 nuclear warheads and can reach the United States in as little as 30 minutes. With a range of 9,000 miles, it can fly further than any other nuclear missile in the world. Overhead, a new strategic bomber designed to project power far into the Pacific Ocean, and China's first stealth jet fighters. But the showstoppers were the weapons of the future. There was the Sharp Sword combat drone, an unmanned aerial combat vehicle that could make piloted strike fighters obsolete. This supersonic reconnaissance drone, designed to locate American aircraft carriers far out in the Pacific Ocean. And a hypersonic missile, a sleek dart that flies at more than 5 times the speed of sound, so fast it can penetrate all existing missile defenses used by the West.
So, Admiral, that is very scary. That's the offensive capability. And this morning's Financial Times has a headline, China targets rare earth exports curbs to hobble U.S. defense industry. They make 80% of the global supply of 17 rare earth minerals. We use them in the production of F-35. So they're producing offensive capability, and now they're going after our capability. Your conclusions?
You haven't even mentioned or shown the most dangerous thing of all. It's invisible, and it's cyber. It's the ability to use electrons, if you will, to attack our electric grid, our transportation systems, our water supplies. We saw probably a hacker go after a water supply down in Florida, but it's indicative of vulnerability. So yes, on a lot of very high-tech, very dangerous offensive military hardware. Yes, on, let's call it geoeconomic power, controlling rare earths, building networks of like-minded nations working together. They've signed an economic deal with Iran. So geoeconomics plus the hardware. And to me, the most concerning thing is actually the software. It's the cyber offensive capability. So yes, a formidable opponent.
Now, we're about the same age, so we will remember the Time magazines that used to come out with the correlation of forces with the Soviet Union. They would show the little guys who stood for battalions, and they would have the tank column. And we were always behind until you got to the nuclear weapons. And that was a way that the Americans were aware of the arms race. They were in Newsweek, Time, and U.S. News and World Report, which is the only way that most middle-class American families actually got anything beyond the nightly news. Does the American public have any idea the correlation of forces that exist now between the PRC and the United States, including cyber?
I think there is a sort of a dawning awareness of it, and I base that, like you, Hugh, I do a lot of speaking around the country, currently all virtual, but I base it on the questions I get, which are reasonably sophisticated, look hard at those kinds of concerns that we ought to have. I think there's a dawning awareness. Hey, if you want to think about from, the 60s and 70s when we were kids, the other thing is the box game called Risk, right? This is a game where you built a coalition of nations, you kind of work to get allies, you work to surround your opponents, because geography has an immutable quality to it. The point of the game of Risk is build up your alliances. I think that's the best prescription as we deal with this increasing juggernaut coming from China. Get the Europeans with us, build up the Japanese military capability, the Australians, the South Koreans, the Singaporeans. Create coalitions that are credible. That's what creates deterrence. That's the only thing, in my view, that's really going to slow down China.
No, Admiral, coming up after you is Congressman Michael Waltz, Green Beret out of Florida. He may, in fact, represent you in Florida. I'm not sure if his district gets up to Jacksonville. Maybe he's a little bit to your south. He has Daytona Beach. And yesterday, and my son works for him, so I always disclose that too. Yesterday, he introduced a resolution in the Congress to boycott the 2022 Chinese Olympics on the basis of, among other things, the genocide underway that Secretary of State Blinken agreed with former Secretary of State Pompeo is underway, the Hong Kong repression, the threats to Taiwan. What's your reaction to that proposal?
I think it is an open question, and here's how I would go at it. First of all, let's look at the history of boycotts. Last time we did that, we, the U.S., boycotted the Olympics over the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. At the end of the day, it didn't change policy one iota. It penalized our athletes. We didn't build that coalition and work together. So I think it's premature, certainly, to talk about a boycott. What ought to make more sense is a quiet conversation, very broadly among the democracies, about whether China ought to be hosting the games, given the fact that they are running concentration camps with up to 1 million Uyghurs, the human rights violations that are frequently on display. I would rather at this stage see a conversation about whether it still makes sense to allow China to even host the games. That would open the path for the IOC to walk it back, choose a new location. I think that doesn't penalize our side, if you will, but it penalizes China appropriately. So let me close with one other thought. There's still time for China to change behavior here. So if part of what the congressman is proposing, by the way, he's not my congressman. I have a different one a little bit north, as you mentioned, but I know him and follow him. I think that it would be a better thing to do to start those conversations without defining exactly what we're going to do, create some uncertainty in the mind of China. That might change their behavior.
No, I'll ask him about that afterwards. But the chicken and the egg, Senator Rick Scott, who is your senator, introduced to move the Olympics, and it got no traction. So Waltz upped the ante, I think, and I'll find out from him after the break, in order to bring leverage to bear on the IOC. Now, the IOC actually moved the Japan Olympics back a year because of the virus. So they have the ability to do that. They could also move the Winter Olympics back a year, and they actually then allow for some separation between winter and summer games and get to Salt Lake City or get to a European neutral, get to Switzerland someplace to hold the games. That isn't the PRC. That is the best thing to do. And then China would be upset with the world, but they'd be upset with the world upon whom they visited this pandemic. Do you think there's any way the IOC does that without the United States leading with a boycott?
I think there's little chance the IOC would do it without not only the United States, but a concerted strategy that brought together the United States, the NATO team, our democratic allies. I think it's a big, complicated diplomatic question. I'm certain that the Biden administration will explore that. Let's face it, they have been more vocal and anti-China concerning human rights than anything else, and that's your best hook to get other nations involved in this. So I think it's important that we look at all the options, and I commend the congressman for surfacing the conversation in the halls of Congress and Senator Scott as well. But I'm more build an alliance and try and get the IOC to move than I am simply announcing the U.S. is going to boycott the games. That could leave us hanging out there roughly as it did in 1980.
Last question. Does boycott help amplify what I began on? Awareness of military parades, rare earth boycotts, cyber threats? Because again, I'm a little less optimistic than you are about whether or not Americans are as aware as they were in the 50s and 60s of the Soviet threat.
I think it does. And conversations about prosaic things that actually impact Americans tend to get Americans' attention. So what about prices of goods, prices of raw materials, the Olympics, as you mentioned, the availability of products coming here, suddenly our prices go up. All those things, I think, have a tendency to focus the mind on potential opponents like China. Certainly, this will be, the Olympic issue will be an interesting one where the Republicans who are strongly, if you will, anti-China kind of meet the Democrats who are strongly pro-human rights. It could be a bridging issue. And I think that would get some traction with the American public across that political spectrum, Hugh.
Admiral James Stavridis, you can find him through Washington Speakers Bureau or at Stavridis.com. Is it Admiral Stav or is it Stavridis.com, Admiral?
AdmiralStav.com. Thank you.
Or the Washington Speakers Bureau. Thank you, Admiral. Be well. Time for me to tell you about a couple of things. First, mortgage rates. I wanted to let you know that here in my hand is the Wall Street Journal today that says, mortgage investors look back to the future. Investors in mortgage companies are starting to anticipate a turn in the cycle, but it may be premature to call an end to the boom. It's very premature. Talk to andrewandtodd.com. Their interest rates are still quite low. I mean, historically low. The lowest that ever. But I note that the 10-year Treasury ticked up to 1.2% this morning. So andrewandtodd.com are the brokers, not brokers. I'm sorry, Andrew and Todd. They are the lenders. They're not brokers. They're with Sierra Pacific Mortgage, and they lend you money. If you go to andrewandtodd.com and fill in all the information, they will come back to you and tell you how to get the most money out of your house, make it your house your bank. You can call 888-888-1172. But what the Journal, I think, does today so well is point out that we are in a historically low interest rate environment. Never had anything like this. And therefore, there's been a boom. What's amazing about Andrew and Todd during the boom is that they've been able to keep up with it and still close people's mortgage in a month or less. I'm not going to say 3 weeks. That's very hard to do, but sometimes they've done it in under 3 weeks. But they can't do anything until you call 888-888-1172. And these rates are not going to last forever. The rate that you get depends on how much equity you have in your home, your credit rating, and a bunch of different things. But you can't get started until you get started. 888-888-1172. And by the way, U.S. oil is above $60 a barrel this morning. Those interest rates are going to rise. Not going to rise? ReliefFactor.com. 1995 is the starter pack. 1995 remains the starter pack. I'm holding up in the right way finally the wonderful blue bag, Charlotte, UNC blue, and you've got lime green. It's easy to spot, but the best way to spot it is by going to ReliefFactor.com. I take it in the first hour, and mind you, in hours 2 and 3, that if you did some long weekend workout, or you folks in Texas who are out shoveling snow for the first time in your life, or you folks in Seattle haven't done it in a few years and your back hurts this morning, ReliefFactor.com. 1995 for Icarian, Kirkman, Rivera, Tron, Omega, the best designed packaging in the world. Take it every day, feel better every day. Come right back here. Congressman Michael Waltz, who I've been speaking about in the first few segments, joins us next.
This is Lon Chen of the Hoover Institution for townhall.com. The Biden administration announced in their first week that the U.S. is rejoining the World Health Organization. But the WHO is a flawed group, one that has performed poorly while the world has struggled with COVID-19. Early on, the group was far too deferential to China, even parroting Beijing's early claim that the virus could not be transmitted between humans. Since then, an independent panel concluded that the WHO dithered in its response, waiting too long to declare an international emergency. All the while, the WHO has continued to block Taiwan's participation because of political objections from the Chinese government, despite the fact that the world has much to learn from Taiwan's exceptional response to the virus. Before rejoining the WHO, we should have demanded some accountability and reform from the group for the $400 million in taxpayer dollars we send to it each year. It looks like we'll keep on writing blank checks to the WHO, which they are more than happy to keep cashing. I'm Lon Chen.
The Pepperdine School of Public Policy, America's unique graduate program for leaders. Learn more at publicpolicy.pepperdine.edu. Trending now on The Larry Elder Show.
Now, my next guest is involved in the effort to recall the governor of California, an effort that at one time seemed pretty fanciful, but no longer. You know it's getting serious when the governor's staff begins to call the effort a coup and suggest that it is being led in part by white nationalists. My guest is a vet of distribution, sales, and marketing, has served in senior exec roles at places like Corporate Express and Staples. He's now applying his expertise to state politics to create a team of volunteers and to create some sort of hopeful movement for conservatism in this state of California, where there isn't a single Republican elected statewide. Please welcome coalition founding member of Recall Gavin 2020, Mike Netter. Mike, how are you?
Larry, I'm doing great today, except Gavin Newsom's still my governor, which I hope to change pretty soon.
You know, Mike, I've heard different things about how the recall effort is going. I heard you're just a smidge short of the signatures. I've heard you got the signatures. What's the truth?
Let me explain. We need 12% of the people that voted for governor last time, which is technically 1,475,000 signatures. We're actually at that figure, but before the public gets too cocky, because they have to be verified signatures, the reality is we need 1.8 to 2 million of them. The good news is we have 5 weeks to go. And you want to hear some more amazing news, Larry?
Sure.
This is not only the largest initiative in American history, this is 90% powered by volunteers, not by the big political machine.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today. Trending now on the Eric Metaxas Show.
Welcome back, America. It's Hugh Hewitt, joined now by Representative Michael Waltz of Florida. Good morning, Congressman. Good to have you.
Hey, good to be on with you, Hugh.
I always disclose to people my son works in your office, and then I can go to the news. Yesterday, you broke on Fox News the idea that you would like the United States to boycott the Winter Olympics in 2022 in China. How's the reaction been to that proposal? Why did you make it?
Well, to be clear, we're actually asking the IOC, the International Olympic Committee, to move the games out of China. Actually, Senator Rick Scott has been asking that for over a year. Speaker Newt Gingrich mentioned it about a year ago. But since they have refused, the International Olympic Community is not abiding by its own moral and ethical standards. We are calling for a boycott. I cannot see how, after the Chinese Communist Party has unleashed the coronavirus on the world, it covered it up, arrested journalists, arrested doctors, obfuscated an investigation by the WHO, and now is actively committing genocide, forced rape, forced sterilization, slave labor in concentration camps, literally as we speak. how do we then have the American flag flying in Beijing? How do we bestow the honor of hosting the Olympics on such a brutal authoritarian dictatorship? And how do we give Xi and his cronies in Beijing the platform of the Olympics to espouse their form of government? Hugh, you've covered this a lot. You know that Xi is actively working to replace the American dream with the China dream around the world. And the Olympics just bestows on him legitimacy for his authoritarian regime. We need to, and the Biden administration needs to walk the walk when it comes to human rights and when it comes to holding China accountable. Enough is enough. We need to pull our athletes back unless the IOC moves the games to another country.
Now, Congressman Waltz, I asked David Drucker in the first hour, Byron York and Admiral Stavridis in the second hour about the Waltz option, the boycott option. And all three of them instantly went to 1980. And they correctly remember, you're too young, but I remember, we were so disappointed. The athletes were so screwed. They all three.
I think, one, you don't have and didn't have necessarily an active genocide going on. I mean, we are literally talking about millions of people in concentration camps, images that have leaked out of China of the Uyghurs on their knees, blindfolded, being loaded into rail cars, loaded into trains, and then being stripped of all of their personal belongings and their heads shaved as they enter these concentration camps for re-education, to be followed by forced sterilization and forced rape. So I think America needs to wake up, and I would encourage Admiral Stavridis, who I have a lot of respect for, and others, to understand the gravity of what's going on, not to mention the over 2 million people that are dead around the world for what Beijing has released and then covered up. So I think there's a magnitude of difference here, and I just can't see then rewarding them literally 11 months from now with an Olympic Games. And then separately, Hugh, let's talk about the financial benefits, that the billions that will pour into Beijing, and all of the multinational companies, NBC, Adidas, Nike, Apple, that the sponsors that stand to make billions, off of the backs of the slave labor and off of the backs of this genocide. So, enough talk. It's time to walk the walk. Social justice doesn't just apply to, U.S. borders. All of these companies talk about responsible social governance. Well, let's see them step up, and let's see them make a tough stand when it comes to their bottom line.
To be clear, Admiral Stavridis is not opposed to it necessarily. He said, try and get an alliance to move the Olympics as the preferred option. And I said, well, Rick Scott's been trying to do that. But here's the follow-up. You're right that Democrats have talked to Human Rights Line, and Secretary of State Blinken said the genocide is real, so they're kind of on the record. We have a minute left. What about the cancel culture that operates in the United States? Ought it not to operate with at least as much force against the sponsors of the Olympics to get them out of the business of happy-faced China advertising when genocide is underway?
Well, yeah, now I would just add 180. I mean, that's a huge number. 180 international human rights organizations have also called for the games to be moved. And I want to be clear, that is absolutely the preferred option. I want our athletes and the world's athletes to be able to compete. But I just don't see how many of these athletes themselves, many of them who have called for social justice, can do so literally in a country where genocide is active and ongoing as we speak. And to talk about cancel culture, I mean, look at the hypocrisy of the NBA, right, where they have backed so many social justice movements here in the United States. But when one coach in Houston says, I stand with freedom in Hong Kong, they almost fire the guy until he deletes his tweet.
Yeah, it's a complaint. We will look for Democratic co-sponsors, Congressman. I hope you get a lot of them. Come back and update us next week. Michael Waltz from Florida. I'll be right back. America, it's Hugh Hewitt.
Trending now on the Eric Metaxas Show.
Where do you see this ending? In other words, I fear that all of these ideologies are a snake swallowing its own tail. In other words, they basically destroy. They don't have the beginning of a clue what they would want to replace it with. Marxism, I really can't imagine what they're suggesting.
Trending now on the Dennis Prager Show.
It is dramatic footage, some of it very ugly. And why they didn't, in their opening statement, show videos which could have lasted all month of what the left has done to this country in terms of violence, riots, and killings is beyond me. I did not find one of the lawyers, I think the first lawyer, terribly effective, but I am not alone in believing that. As a general rule, in all of history, the good guys or the better guys do not know how to fight. I don't know exactly why that is, but it is. They're all horrified by the video of what took place January 6th, and horrify them exponentially by showing what the left did to this country while Democrats cheered, as opposed to Republicans' repugnance. That should be a point that is made there. You might as well use the national forum that you have, if indeed people are watching. I have no idea if people are watching. You have to be very, very interested in politics in general, or specifically in Donald Trump, to watch all of this. But I don't know. That'd be a very interesting thing to find out.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today.
This is Albert Mohler for townhall.com. The American experiment is founded upon a presupposition, a prior commitment to an ordered liberty, an established order. That means policies. It means a covenant. In our case, it means a constitution. As of right now, the U.S. Constitution is the longest surviving written constitution in human history. It's a remarkable document. All of that came to the fore in violent events that interrupted the joint session of Congress to count the votes of the Electoral College. At the end of the day, our constitutional order proved itself once again resilient. But that doesn't take away any of the tragedy and the horror of what took place. It was an enormous stress test on ordered liberty, a stress test brought on by the President of the United States.
We will never give up. We will never concede. It doesn't happen. You don't concede when there's theft involved.
It's an opportunity for the right, the left, conservatives, liberals, all Americans to repudiate political violence and reaffirm, once again, our commitment to ordered liberty. It's the American way. I'm Albert Mohler.
The Pepperdine School of Public Policy, America's unique graduate program for leaders. Learn more at publicpolicy.pepperdine.edu. Trending now on America First with Sebastian Gorka.
But who cares? 33, 28, died in a hospital, died in a nursing home. They died.
Who cares? They died. Remind you of anyone? Benghazi, Hillary. What difference does it make? It makes a difference. From the New York Post headline, Cuomo aide Melissa DeRosa admits they hid nursing home data so feds wouldn't find out. Let's ask somebody who's definitely got an opinion. Coming from hosting his own show on Fox News. Not quite. It was only a 25-minute segment, but it was fabulous. From Congressional District Number 1 in New York. Great friend of the show, Congressman Lee Zeldin. Welcome.
It's good to be back with you, Seb.
Congrats on that great hit. I have to ask you, I'm just going to be super cynical for a second. This is a guy who was given what? He was given an Emmy as governor for his use of TV briefings in his handling of the coronavirus. Now we find out they hid the stats of the deaths from the feds so they wouldn't get in trouble. Is Governor Cuomo ever going to face any consequences?
An Emmy, and he wrote a self-congratulatory book on leadership of his response, and he started selling this ridiculous poster. I don't know if you remember this story, but if you haven't seen it, it was absurd. Several months ago, praising himself and the response, and that when he says "who cares," what you think about are the lives impacted, the families, the people who lost their mom or dad, grandmother or grandfather.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today. Trending now on The Mike Gallagher Show.
What's with these Republicans? I would just give $1 and a donut to figure out what's in the mind of somebody like Senator.
Welcome back, America. Morning Glory. I'm Hugh Hewitt. The Ted Lasso of talk radio. Ted Lassoing for 30 years before Ted Lasso showed up. Now, when I say the Ted Lasso of talk radio, that simply telegraphs for you that I love this television show. And if I do anything for you today on this Tuesday, February the 16th, it is to tell you, get Apple TV and watch Ted Lasso. Just do it. Jason has been on Saturday Night Live for a decade, but didn't know he had this range. And it's actually just about the funniest thing consistently since Seinfeld. And it's actually nicer than Seinfeld, although it's much more explicit. I do want to warn you, it's not for kids. the language and the sexuality. It's not pornographic. It's not a lot of that, but there's a lot of language and it's sexualized content, but it's not. It's nothing that will shock the average American adult, and it's just as funny as can be, because, well, for many reasons. But the premise, which you learn, not a spoiler, in the first 5 minutes, is that a woman who has received a British soccer team in the divorce from her billionaire husband, who loves the soccer team more than anything, is going to intentionally destroy the soccer team by hiring the head coach of Wichita State Shockers in football, who doesn't know anything about soccer. That's Ted Lasso. And so my gift to you today is an unqualified 2 thumbs up for Ted Lasso. Go and tell me what you think about it. You will thank me if you have not heard about it. And I think most people have. Although in our little studio pod of 4 people, only 1 had seen it. 5 people, 2 out of 5 have now seen it. Adam and me, we're the smart guys. Dwayne, Harley, and Ben, they're behind the culture curve. But we are ahead of it. Let me do the news of the morning in case you missed the beginning of the show. Prime Minister Netanyahu in Israel says, if a final 570,000 Israelis over 50 get vaccinated, every other Israeli over 50 has been vaccinated, we will be done with COVID. So what's that tell you? That tells you that Israel's extremely successful, most successful country in the world that has had a vaccine campaign to contain COVID as opposed to quarantine. And they have targeted 50 plus. Now, in the United States, we've targeted 65 plus, and I become eligible next week, so they'll probably drop it to 60 plus, and I'll never get the vaccine. But whatever is the best. And if Israel is telling us to move to 50 plus, we ought to get ready to move to 50 plus. Is that what you need to stop it? Then get there. Meanwhile, Israel is opening stores, gyms, and culture yesterday in a major move towards normalcy. Also, a story out of Israel, Netanyahu says, look, I'm not worried that President Biden hasn't called me yet. I am. I think that's an intentional slap at our closest ally in the Middle East, like the review of the United Arab Emirates. If you're a supporter of the state of Israel, you got to ask yourself, why does Joe Biden not like Israel? Have we not always stood with Israel? Does not Israel always stand with us? Did they not, at our request, respond to the Scud missiles that Saddam Hussein sent flying into Israel in 1991? Did they not do that for us? And the answer is yes, they did that for us. We cooperate very closely with them. We have guaranteed them a qualitative military edge in the Middle East. And AIPAC is broadly bipartisan, maybe the most bipartisan PAC in America. It shows a strong supporter of Israel. And Joe Biden hasn't called the president. He's called the genocidal leader of China, President Xi, but he can't call Benjamin Netanyahu. What is wrong with Joe Biden? And I think that telegraphs to you where we will have enormous differences with Democrats going forward. In the New York Times this morning, Biden and Fed leave 1970 inflation fear behind. Presidents who find themselves digging out of recession have long heeded warnings of inflation-obsessed economists. Okay, that's the New York Times, not balanced reporting. I am not an economist and I'm not inflation-obsessed, but I was a young adult in the late 70s and early 80s, buying our first home, fetching Mrs. Hewitt and I in 1985 at a 12.5% interest rate. I'll roll in my sponsored ad by andrewandtodd.com right now. Can you imagine right now, andrewandtodd.com, who are a Sierra Pacific mortgage, 888-888-1172, are offering mortgages in the 3s, 3%, and in the high 2s, depending on your credit, where you are, how much equity you have. They will refinance your house or help you buy a house in the low 3s or the high 2s. When the fetching Mrs. Hewitt and I bought our first townhouse in the Beltway in 1985, we had to have a 12.5% mortgage. And it was unbelievable. We did not get a parent or grandparent to co-sign and non-occupy, which is an option now, even at these low rates. But it's because of inflation. Inflation is the most destructive force for accumulated wealth. People who've saved their whole lives get wiped out in 2 years of inflation in hyperinflation countries, and they lose 20% of their worth in low inflation countries over 2 years. If 10% inflation for 2 years, you're going to lose more than 20% of your wealth that you've accumulated. So if you had $100,000 stored up at the age of 45 or 50, you're starting to get ready for retirement, all of a sudden it's below 80 grand because of inflation is a great destroyer. And so that's why I encourage people to get a house now at these low rates, because of a New York Times story like this, which I'm holding up if you're watching on YouTube, and you should be watching on YouTube. You definitely want to get to andrewandtodd.com today, because it is, when they don't care, when they say spend $2 trillion, doesn't matter, don't worry about it. Janet Yellen says, oh, we don't have any inflation problem. Then you have an inflation problem. Good news for free speech. Parler is back online. I have an account over there. We cross-post the videos that we put up every day at YouTube and at Facebook are all cross-posted at Parler. No matter where you are, you can find Hugh Hewitt. Parler is is now being headed by my old friend Mark Meckler. He's the new CEO. I've known Mark for 20 years. Maybe not 20, maybe 15. He started Tea Party Patriots, and I was an informal advisor when they did that. Mark is a wonderful guy, man of great Christian integrity. Parler will be great under Meckler. That's just a great thing. I'll talk about this with Tom Cotton later. Why some state and local governments are desperate for stimulus. Last year, during the COVID arrival and peaking, more than 1 in 20 state government jobs vanished, and tax revenue fell in 26 states. Now, it didn't fall in California, didn't fall in New York. Fell in some of their cities, but not in the state as a whole. But 1 in 20 government jobs vanished. Now, I feel bad, including 43% of government jobs in Alaska, by the way. Excuse me, tax revenue fell by 43% in Alaska, and it fell in Texas by 10%, in Oregon by 13%, but it didn't fall in 24 states. But across the board, state and local governments started to shed employees because they're not going to have the same money that they did, and they know that. Eventually, COVID will catch up with everyone. So my question, it's very hard on people who lost their jobs. And hopefully a lot of this was done by attrition. They just simply did not replace people, or they did early buyouts or whatever. Government shrunk by 1 out of 20 jobs. Here's the question. Did you notice? Did you notice that government shrunk that much? That's pretty big. If 5% of the jobs across the country vanished, we'd have a major employment crisis. And we do have an employment dip in the United States. I wouldn't call it a crisis. The Great Depression is a crisis. Toledo had 90% unemployment during the Great Depression. But when you lose 1 out of 20 jobs, you ought to notice it, right? Did you notice the government? I don't think so. I don't think that you did. And I close by urging you, again, mortgage investors look back to the future. That's the other Wall Street Journal story. Head over to andrewandtodd.com, andrewandtodd.com. When we come back, you can call 1-800-520-1234, 1-800-520-1234. I just would love to know if any of you have watched Ted Lasso. If you have, let me know what you think about it. 1-800-520-1234. It's the Hugh Hewitt Show.
Portions of the Hugh Hewitt Show brought to you by Sierra Pacific Mortgage. For more info, call 888-888-1172.
Trending now on The Mike Gallagher Show.
What's with these Republicans? I would just give $1 and a donut to figure out what's in the mind of somebody like Senator Bill Cassidy. Here's cut 5. This is the same guy who was last week, just the other day, on with Meet the Press and Chuck Todd.
The president wasn't there. He wasn't allowed counsel. They didn't amass evidence. In 5 hours, they kind of judged, and boom, he's impeached. Now, I'm told that under the Watergate, under the Clinton impeachments, there were truckloads of information. Here, it was a video. There was no process. I mean, it's almost like, if it happened in the Soviet Union, you would have called it a show trial.
That's the guy. That was last week. That's the guy who yesterday voted with the Democrats to proceed with the trial because he didn't like Bruce Castor. And listen, Bruce Castor did a terrible job. President Trump was said to be very angry behind the scenes. Fox News quotes sources as saying Trump was furious and beyond angry over his defense team's showing on day 1 of his second impeachment trial, despite his ultimate acquittal almost certain. The sources who spent time with President Trump said he was particularly incensed with the effort thus far by his attorney, Bruce Castor. Do you get the feeling that the reason he hasn't had a strong showing by his lawyers is because no attorney wants to touch this thing?
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today. Trending now on The Charlie Kirk Show.
One of the things I wanted to go through is how the Democrats tampered with evidence. And I was going through it with our team. I said, you do know that Eric Swalwell, who's a lover of Fang Fang, the Chinese Communist Party spy, he tampered with evidence. And David Schoen, to his great credit, came out and proved that point, that Eric Swalwell, and this is why this is not a trial. This is a Hollywood Broadway production. That's all this is. So in a real trial, you'd say, Your Honor, this evidence is tampered with. So you had Swalwell, the lover of Fang Fang, who came out and said that Donald Trump called for the cavalry to come. Cavalry. Now, anyone in the Christian world knows that there's a difference between Calvary and Calvary. I sometimes, without unintentionally,
Welcome back, America. It's Hugh Hewitt. I want to tell you something. I'm sending a note to my friend Jan Janera, who runs The Wild Adventure. And we were emailing about a couple of things over the weekend. And he asked me, have I ever seen Lonesome Dove? And my number, by the way, is 1-800-520-1234. If you have watched Ted Lasso, I want to talk to you briefly. Just want to know what you think about it. 1-800-520-1234. I think it's the best television I have seen in the uplifting, decent, honest, happy, smart, inspiring, this is how you live kind of division of television, and there is none. And it's been nominated for a couple of Golden Globes, Best Actor in a Comedy Series, Best Television Comedy Series. And it is. I mean, it's just far and away. I can't wait till August to see season 2. And the Fetching Mrs. Hewitt and I binge watch. We never binge watch television. We just don't do it because it takes away the pleasure. If you just binge watch and roll through television, you do not enjoy each episode and think about it and talk about it. But we couldn't stop ourselves. It was that good. It's actually that well written, that well done. But I don't know that a lot of people know about it. 1-800-520-1234. And maybe nobody in this audience knows about Ted Lasso. You might not. Adam did. Adam's seen it, loved it. I haven't met anyone yet who's seen it who didn't love it. And I'm writing Jim, but I'm not getting any calls, so I don't know if anybody's seen it. So while we wait for those calls, I want to play for you Rochelle Walensky, the new CDC director, who held a phone press conference yesterday talking about why schools spread, why schools are still closed. Cut number 12.
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, what we are finding from the science-based literature is that there is more spread that is happening in the community when schools are not open than when schools are open. So we certainly want to make sure that there is limited to no transmission of disease in our schools. And of course, we are managing all sorts of risks. So if schools are closed, there's lots of other risks. That is risks to food insecurity and many of the other things that Donna has mentioned, a lack of educational milestones being missed. So many other things that we have to think about in the risk. So really what we're trying to do is make sure that there is limited to no transmission in the schools, and we believe with the strategies that we have put forward that there will be limited to no transmission in the schools if they are followed.
Do you remember the science first stuff that President Biden promised? And he's got a great guy in Ron Klain who knows this stuff. They've departed from it because of teachers' unions. If you listen to what Rochelle Walensky says, she says there is more COVID spread in a community when a school is closed than when it is open, which means we ought to open the schools. But the direction put out by Team Biden will actually greatly limit the number of schools that are open. It is a collapse. It is a collapse to teachers' unions. Play it again, cut number 12.
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, what we are finding from the science-based literature is that there is more spread that is happening in the community when schools are not open than when schools are open. So we certainly want to make sure that there is limited to no transmission of disease.
It's an admission. Schools should be open. By the way, the U.S. 7-day average of daily new cases dropped below 90,000 people. In the Washington Post this morning, breaking news. That's the first time since early November. Steep drop. Down to 56,000 new cases on Monday. Now, that might be artificially low due to the holiday, but the 7-day average is down to 90,000 a day. It's plummeting. It's plummeting because the vaccine is working. The vaccine is working. Also, by the way, terrible, terrible tornadoes tear through the North Carolina coast. Something I've never seen. Coming up this morning, at least 3 people are dead in Brunswick County, 100 people injured in the North Carolina coastal communities of Sunset Beach and Ocean Isle Beach. Prayers for these people. Didn't see that until now. Pretty awful. I'll be right back on the Hugh Hewitt Show, 1-800-520-1234. Nobody watched Ted Lasso. I'm amazed.
Trending now on The Larry Elder Show.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm engaging in whataboutism. Here I am bringing up an example to show my point. I can't do that. It shows you hypocrisy, selective outrage. Hillary Clinton can parade around for 4 years and call the election illegitimate and say it was stolen. And nobody said, hey, excuse me, you're giving energy to Donald Trump down the road to say the same thing, so maybe you ought to back. Nobody said anything. You know why? Because they believed it was stolen. 78% of Democrats believe that the Russians interfered, which everybody knows they did and has acknowledged, but that they changed the outcome of the election. And Jay Johnson, the then head of the Homeland Security Department under Obama, testified there's no evidence whatsoever. We haven't reached any kind of conclusion that the outcome was changed. We know that no voting tallies were changed. They tried, but they failed. Yet 78% of Democrats, and they get their news from CNN, their feed from Facebook, New York Times, and 78% of Democrats have convinced themselves that but for whatever Russia did, Donald Trump would not be president, even though the intel community has never reached that conclusion. Am I not supposed to bring that up? It says something about your reason and your logic. I said that yesterday about the O.J. Simpson case. How do you respect a bunch of people who look at the same evidence of overwhelming guilt and say the man was innocent man who was framed? How do you respect somebody like that? How do you respect their judgment, their mentality, their ability to reason? Same thing over here.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today.
This is Lon Chen of the Hoover Institution for townhall.com. The Biden administration announced in their first week that the U.S. is rejoining the World Health Organization. But the WHO is a flawed group, one that has performed poorly while the world has struggled with COVID-19. Early on, the group was far too deferential to China, even parroting Beijing's early claim that the virus could not be transmitted between humans. Since then, an independent panel concluded that the WHO dithered in its response, waiting too long to declare an international emergency. All the while, the WHO has continued to block Taiwan's participation because of political objections from the Chinese government, despite the fact that the world has much to learn from Taiwan's exceptional response to the virus. Before rejoining the WHO, we should have demanded some accountability and reform from the group for the $400 million in taxpayer dollars we send to it each year. It looks like we'll keep on writing blank checks to the WHO, which they are more than happy to keep cashing. I'm Lon Chen.
The Pepperdine School of Public Policy, America's unique graduate program for leaders. Learn more at publicpolicy.pepperdine.edu. Trending now on The Larry Elder Show.
Mike, what is the number one reason you think people in the state want him recalled? Is it his handling of the COVID-19 crisis? Is it the way he's been ordering, things like oil and gas leases and pushing a left-wing agenda? That can't be it, because this is a left-wing state. So people must be ticked off about his handling of the COVID-19. And Mike, if that's the case, then what happens when the vaccines kick in, and what happens when Governor Newsom begins to back down, as he's already begun to back down?
California has 5 million Republicans, 9 million Democrats, but our biggest problem we have out here is there's 6.5 million NPPs, people that just aren't paying attention. Mm-hmm. They actually tend to be conservative, and the one thing that's uniting the state, believe it or not, on the right and the left, is actually Gavin himself. The number one reason, if you were to boil into 2 buckets, is everything you said, but the reality is he's a bad leader making poor decisions, mm-hmm. and COVID just amplified. We started this before COVID really hit the scene, if you will. This has just amplified the cycle, and things like dining at the French Laundry. You think that's not a bad decision? The EDD, oops, we handed out $30 billion of money we shouldn't have. You think that's bad management? Schools not reopening. The list and reasons to recall Gavin, we have about 64 on our website, and we still couldn't fill it up at recallgavin2020.com, is long and endless. The reality is California has a bad governor making bad decisions, sending us in a bad direction for those of us that live out here. Mm-hmm. Our state's on fire, our power goes out, our taxes are too high.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today. Trending now on the Eric Metaxas Show.
We'll move on to what is the main event at the moment, which is the radicalism of the Biden agenda.
Welcome back, America. It's Hugh Hewitt. I'm going to go back to the news in just a second, but I rarely observe something new in radio, so I'm going to tell you this is new. I asked any listener, I had 400 affiliates, 1-800-520-1234. any listener who had watched Ted Lasso to call. This goes to the difficulty of penetration of new platforms. Apple TV launched Ted Lasso. It's Jason Sudeikis. Bill Lawrence is the producer, I think. And it debuted in August, I think, August 14th. So it's been out 5 months. And it's broken audience record for Apple TV. It's its number one comedy each week. 25% new viewers to the service. It's a pop culture phenom that has grown its viewership by more than 600%, fueled by binge watchers, setting new records for completion and engagement worldwide. That doesn't tell you. I went looking to find out how many people have watched Ted Lasso. And I am the Ted Lasso of talk radio, so I want to put that out there. And so I went to look, and they won't tell you. And the reason they won't tell you, they'll tell you the growth. I know TV ratings like the back of my hand. I was on TV nightly for 10 years in LA with PBS and know the ratings at NBC and MSNBC. I have the lowest rated show in the history of MSNBC, although Ronan likes to argue that Ronan Farrow likes to argue he was lower rated than I was. But I said, no, you can't beat 8:30 in the morning after an infomercial on Saturday. You cannot do it. It's physically impossible to get lower numbers than that. And that was the plan by MSNBC. But in any event, I know low ratings. And everybody knows how many people are watching everything in television at any time. So they could tell you, if Apple TV wanted to tell you how many people, is it broken? 1-800-520-1234. Yeah, we're wondering if the phones are broken because we've never, ever actually experienced that because cranks will usually call if nobody else will. You know, drunk people in the middle of the night in Hawaii will call up and they'll say, I don't know. You know, that happens. That's why we have call screeners and a 6-second delay. But never seen that before, so I'm wondering if the phones are broken. Dwayne was working in the studio yesterday, so it's quite possible. The numbers, the Apple engagement numbers, it's interesting. Apple said that Ted Lasso has grown its viewership by over 600% since it debuted. Now, if they had 100 people, you know, that means they go to 6,000 people. That's not really that many people. I don't know how many. I've never watched Apple TV in my life until a good friend said, go watch Ted Lasso. And we did. And what I really think is interesting is that that growth, according to Apple TV, has been fueled by binge watchers setting new records for completion and engagement worldwide. That's very... Now, they've already optioned a third season. The second season's coming out in August. And it's going to be the new Game of Thrones, the new thing. It will penetrate eventually. And just remember, you heard it here first. I am the Ted Lasso of the talk radio. But let me go to the other news while we wait to see if our phones are broken. Because I can't believe no one in the Hugh Hewitt audience has ever watched Ted Lasso. It's possible. It's possible. I played for you last segment, Rochelle Walensky, and I'm going to talk about it with Ted Cotton next segment. Let's replay it. Cut number 12 on why the schools aren't open. It makes no sense.
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, what we are finding from the science-based literature is that there is more spread that is happening in the community when schools are not open than when schools are open. So we certainly want to make sure that there is
more spread happening in the community when schools are not opened than when schools are open. So that means that you've got to open your schools to slow the spread. And what did the Joe Biden administration do? Issued guidelines that keep schools closed because public employee teachers unions don't want to go back to work. Now, private schools are open. In San Francisco, the private schools are open. Guess who goes to those schools? White kids, rich kids. The public schools, guess who go to those schools? Minority kids, poor kids. The public schools are closed. The private schools are open. Why is that? Teachers' unions. Former Wisconsin Governor Scott Walker was on Fox with Rachel Campos Duffy Cut number 3.
Well, we made the case to the people of our state, and that's exactly what we need to do with the American people. And I think you're right. This is about the union bosses, not about the teachers. Teachers overwhelmingly understand that these kids across this country desperately need to get back into the classroom. We need to make that case. In Chicago, the mayor, the mayor and I don't often agree on other politics. She's a Democrat. I'm obviously a Republican, but she's absolutely right. For weeks, she's been trying to get these kids back. The Catholic schools have been open since last fall. If she was in Wisconsin as opposed to Illinois, those schools would already be open, and those kids would be doing far better than they're doing right now.
So what's your advice to a Democrat governor who's in a state where the teachers' unions don't want them to open? What would you say to a governor to take on the unions? How did you do it?
Well, again, the bottom line is you got to communicate the story. The left is often really good at playing up fairness issues. This is the ultimate fairness issue. Our kids are falling behind. Even Joe Biden's old CDC director said it is safe, not only for students, but for staff to go back, until she was told, hey, wait a minute, you've got to kowtow to the teachers union. The union bosses should be driving decisions, not the American people.
Right.
I got a simple response to them. You're not essential. You're not an essential worker if you can't show up when it's essential. It's now essential to get people back to school.
Yeah, Governor Walker is right on. Update. Our phones are down. Now, I assume, I tried to call. It's busy. I assume it's because Dallas, which is the home of SRN, is out of power. I assume that Texas, all right, we blame Texas. And ever since football collapsed in Texas, they've been sad. So maybe they didn't go to work today at the phone exchange. But our 800 number, 520-1234, goes through Texas. So we assume that since it snowed in Texas, you know, we Buckeyes just do not understand this. It goes to the toughness of people. If you grow up on Lake Erie, and all 4 of my grandparents were born, raised, and died and are buried in Ashtabula, Ohio, and both my parents were from there, and my parents went south. They moved to Warren, which is, 30 miles down Route 45. And WHK listeners know this on 1420 in Cleveland. We all know this. If you're from the South, you think of snow as like an earthquake or a tornado. And in Ohio, we think it's kind of fun. And we're ready for it, and we deal with it. Even Jerry Hendricks, the author of To Provide and Maintain, which is a great book on the Navy, posted a picture yesterday that I think he took in Ohio of when the blizzard of 78 rolled through Indiana. I'm sure that was taken in Ohio. We just don't actually blink when you get 5 feet of snow. That's just a snow day. And the schools might close in the morning, but you're back to school the next day and usually have to walk through it uphill both ways sort of thing to get to school. And that's what Buckeyes do. But in Texas, they're paralyzed. Absolutely paralyzed. And that goes to the collapse of football in Texas. If you're not going to be tough, you're not going to be tough. Meanwhile, in California, Rick Grinnell, who many people expect to run for governor, along with Kevin, whose name I cannot remember, who is the mayor of San Diego. Rick Grinnell was on with Laura Ingraham talking about Governor Newsom and why he's going to be recalled. Cut number 4.
Well, listen, Gavin is panicking, Laura, and clearly the White House trying to throw in some lifelines means that they're trying to keep all other Democrats out of trying to run if he's recalled. And I think that's a disaster as well. But Democrats, independents are signing this recall petition to recall Gavin Newsom in record numbers. This is a problem for him across the board from just people who want to open up. He's mismanaged everything. We have rich people getting the vaccine and cancer hospitals not getting the vaccine.
Yeah, the illegal immigrants getting the vaccine.
Beaches.
Yeah, the illegal immigrants getting them.
He's closed the beaches. That's not science. I mean, he is somebody who has mismanaged COVID from the beginning, and he thought he could get away with it because we are a one-state party rule. But the Democrats who voted him in are tired of it.
You know what Rick Grinnell does not tell you, though? Rick Grinnell does not tell you in that clip, unfortunately, that the Democrats are going to commit a quasi-election fraud. Not the kind where you stop ballots and you stuff ballot boxes. They're going to move the recall election. Now, state law is very clear. If the right number of signatures are turned in within 6 months, the recall election must be held. And there is no, and they say you can schedule it for the same day as another election if there's another election scheduled within those 6 months. There will be none. March, April, May, June, July, August. There is no election between March 1 and August 31st. There isn't one in September. There isn't one in October. There's not one until next year. So the word is that the Democratic legislature, to protect Gavin, will move the date of the recall election to the following year, to March of 2022, in order to allow more time for the state to recover from the catastrophic handling of the virus and the rollout of the vaccine. That would be, in my view, election fraud. That would be election meddling. That would be like what happened in the last cycle when all of the election laws were changed to benefit Democrats. And the excuse was given in many places of the virus. And the same excuse will be given in California. We can't hold an election during the virus, so we're going to postpone. The virus will be well under control by August. It absolutely will be, unless they plan on continuing the California crack-up. And that's what's happening. So I want you to listen again. Rick Grinnell and Laura Ingraham talking about Gavin Newsom, cut number 4.
Well, listen, Gavin is panicking, Laura, and clearly the White House trying to throw in some lifelines means that they're trying to keep all other Democrats out of trying to run if he's recalled. And I think that's a disaster as well. But you know, Democrats, independents are signing this recall petition to recall Gavin Newsom in record numbers. This is a problem for him across the board, from just people who want to open up. He's mismanaged everything. We have rich people getting the vaccine and cancer hospitals not getting the vaccine.
Stop right there. It goes on into the details of the screw-up, and they are massive and many. But what Rick didn't get to, and what people need to start watching, is will California's legislature intervene to change the law to benefit Gavin Newsom in a recall? They can. By the way, it's completely legal to try and muscle all other Democrats out. Completely legal. It is only surface legal to move the date, to change the law to protect the governor. Yeah, it's legal. It's wrong. What's legal and right is relieffactor.com. I took it in the first time. I'm holding up the bag. If you're watching on YouTube, you should definitely be using relieffactor.com. $19.95. $19.95 gets you 3 weeks of relief. Gets you started on relieffactor.com. Do not miss the opportunity. Did 8.5 miles yesterday. Feel great today. Be back out this morning. Why? Because that's how you stay healthy. You got to keep moving. You got to keep moving. And to keep moving, you get relieffactor.com. Don't go anywhere, America. Senator Tom Cotton joins me next. Why are the schools closed? Answer, well, we'll hear from him next on the Hugh Hewitt Show.
Trending now on America First with Sebastian Gorka.
So we have an admission of culpability. We have 14,000 dead in the homes. Where do New Yorkers go next who lost a husband, a wife? What's the next step, Congressman?
I would say a few things. One is you have law enforcement, you have prosecutors at other levels of government that could take actions, the first thing. Right. Secondly, the New York Republican congressional delegations, and our numbers are increasing. Claudia Tenney won her, was finally certified the winner of her race and was sworn in this past week. 8 of us today sent a letter to the Department of Justice with regards to this obstruction of justice case that's emerging, calling on the Department of Justice to investigate this charge. Now, you have a confirmation hearing that's coming up. Merrick Garland, the nominee to be the next Attorney General. Right. Inside of that confirmation hearing is a great opportunity for senators to maybe ask about this letter, or put aside my letter that was sent with my colleagues today, just asking about the underlying issue, and you can't allow, with all these different confirmation hearings, the person who's answering your question to just not give you any answer on any of this. We need to get assurances that something like this is going to be pursued. Don't do it for me. Don't do it for a member of Congress. You're doing it for those thousands of families.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today. Trending now on The Mike Gallagher Show.
The impeachment trial will proceed. Dun, dun, dun. Big vote yesterday. That's one headline, USA Today. Huge font, trial to proceed. Chilling video, managers open by reviving riot. And then the vote was taken, 56-44. 6 Republicans joined with the Democrats in claiming that this show trial, this snap impeachment, is constitutional. Bill Cassidy, for some reason, out of the clear blue, last week he's on TV saying, oh, it's a show trial, doesn't mean anything, it's unconstitutional. But because he didn't like the performance of the president's lawyers yesterday, somehow he decided to vote suddenly that it was constitutional. But then again, that brings you to 6 Republicans, which means you're far short from the 17 Republican threshold to get a conviction. They've given away the ending. The vote yesterday sort of confirms that Trump will be acquitted, which will lead to the former president correctly
Hewitt Show returns from break.
He's been vindicated.
In 5 seconds.
Welcome back, America. It's Hugh Hewitt, joined now by Senator Tom Cotton of the great state of Arkansas, which I believe avoided getting smashed by the winter storm. Am I right about that, Senator?
No, Hugh, not quite. Some places in Arkansas have more than 10 inches of snow and lots of sub-zero temperature. So like the rest of the Midwest, really most of the country, all the way down to southern Texas, I gather, it's a deep freeze right now.
You know what we call that in Ohio, Senator? We call that April. So I'm just surprised.
Aren't you sitting in Southern California right now?
I am, but I'm telling you, I grew up in Ohio, and we just call that April in Ohio. Senator, I want to talk to you about your tweet this weekend, and I've been playing the CDC's Rochelle Walensky, and I've been playing Rick Grinnell. Why are the schools closed?
The schools are closed because Joe Biden and the Democrats are beholden to teachers' unions. Joe Biden's single biggest donor, and they're ignoring the science after demanding for a year that only the science can dictate the choices we should make about how to deal with this pandemic. Look, it's been clear for a long time, both abroad and since August in many states like Arkansas, that kids can be back in school and teachers and kids can be safe before the vaccine was even rolled out, before individuals get vaccinated, with basic precautions like wearing masks and keeping kids socially distanced, eating lunches at your desks. It's not perfect. It's not the way we want kids to learn in the long term, but it is sure a lot better than having kids stuck at home alone with frantic parents, being isolated, suffering from mental health problems. Kids need to be back in school, and they could be back in school all across the country if it weren't for Joe Biden and the Democrats putting teachers' unions ahead of kids.
Now, are the Arkansas public schools open, Senator?
Yeah, Hugh, Arkansas public schools have been open since August, and that's 5 days a week of in-person instruction in every school. Now, every school that I've visited, at least, also offers a online adjunct. If a student or a parent has a vulnerability that makes them particularly susceptible to the virus, they can stay home. Some schools have, on occasion, shifted for a few days to a remote learning only model if they've had, say, teachers or staff usually have to quarantine because of potential exposure. I'm not aware of any single mass event where you've had widespread numbers of cases related to public schools in Arkansas, or for that matter, across the country. I think if you did have that, it would be on CNN every hour on the hour. So again, it's not perfect. It's not the way we want our kids to learn in the long run. But if you look at the setbacks that so many kids are having in terms of their intellectual and social development, if the mental health challenges that kids have, the strain it puts on working parents to have to find child care arrangements for their kids, there's no question that schools across the country can be opened 5 days a week for in-person learning, as they have been in Arkansas and so many other states since August. But Joe Biden and the Democrats don't want to do it.
So my question, Senator, why are the public employee unions in Arkansas cooperating? I assume that you have teachers unions in Arkansas and not in California. What's the difference there?
Well, I think in certain states like California or New York, their public employee unions are just much stronger, and they've been rewarded with ever greater pay and benefits and political power by the politicians on whom they shower their campaign contributions. In Arkansas, as in so many other states, that's just not the case. I mean, we do have some teachers unions, not that many, frankly, but we have some, but have a much longer history of working in a more cooperative fashion. There was a time when one teachers union last fall didn't want to show up, and the school stayed open, and virtually all the teachers showed up. It's just a different kind of culture and an approach to the relationship between teachers and educators on the one hand, and families and kids on the other hand.
So what I want to prove for the audience, not all public employees are the same. There are some teachers unions that are responsible, as in Arkansas, and or at least not powerful enough to stop the government from bringing them back to work. But in Chicago, where they announced a breakthrough, the breakthrough was actually to open 1 day a week, Senator Cotton. It's extraordinary. And children die because of this. I think that's the key part of the public health equation, is that the consequences of this may not be readily apparent to people without small children, but it's disastrous for children.
Yeah, again, Hugh, the putting aside the intellectual academic development of these kids, stuff that they'll never get back. Like, you can't turn back the clock. They've missed now a year in school. We can only stop that harm. The mental health implications of this, and you see so many stories of kids suffering from depression or anxiety, or tragically kids committing suicide because of the loneliness and despair that they face. I mean, it is just appalling what these Democratic politicians across the country, up to and including Joe Biden, are doing to kids to protect one of their great political patrons. And Joe Biden, remember, he attacked Donald Trump throughout the campaign for not listening to science, not listening to experts. I mean, he basically forced his CDC director to go out and have a public show trial to confess error and accommodate his largest donors. When she had said, frankly, what we all know, what we've seen through our own experience in places like Arkansas, kids can be back in school 5 days a week in person. They should be back in school.
They should be. Senator Cotton, thank you for joining me. That is absolutely one of the clearest distinctions between Republican and Democrat right now. Republicans want the schools open. Big donor Democrats, the school unions, public employee unions do not. It's that simple. Thank you, Senator Cotton. Thank you for listening. Dwayne and Adam, thank you. Ben and Harley, thank you. We'll be back tomorrow on the next Hugh Hewitt Show.